Thanks for joining. Find your most relaxing position, take a slow breath in, and let's begin our very quiet stroll through history. And if you feel like these videos are of any use to you, then you can like and subscribe, but only if you really feel like it. And now, let's begin. In the bustling world of Viking longhouses, practicality wasn't just a preference, it was a lifestyle. These architectural marvels, crafted with the precision of a Norse warrior wielding an axe, were the communal hubs of their time, doubling as living spaces, workshops, and even political arenas. If you think squeezing your life into a modern tiny home is impressive, these Vikings were doing it a millennium ago, minus the Wi-Fi and minimalist aesthetic. Let's set the scene. A typical Viking longhouse stretched anywhere from 50 to 250 feet in length. Imagine a wooden leviathan resting on the Scandinavian landscape, its walls breathing with the stories of generations. The width, a cozy 16 to 20 feet, just enough to maintain structural integrity while keeping out the unforgiving Nordic elements. The roof, a masterclass in thatch and wooden planks, sloped dramatically to shrug off snow and rain, because nobody likes a soggy ceiling. Now, before anyone starts romanticizing these rustic wooden wonderlands, it's important to remember that Viking longhouses were less about hygge and more about hustle. The longhouse was a hive of activity, not a serene retreat. These were the original open-plan homes, where privacy was as foreign a concept as central heating. Families lived, ate, and slept together, with livestock often sharing the space. Yes, you heard that right. Cows and sheep were the original house guests, helping to keep the place warm with their body heat, lending new meaning to the phrase warm and cozy. Construction-wise, the Vikings were nothing short of ingenious. The walls of longhouses were typically made from vertical wooden planks or logs, packed tightly together without the aid of modern screws or nails. Instead, they used wooden pegs and an impressive understanding of friction to hold everything together. Talk about sustainable building practices. The foundations were often dug into the earth, giving the structure stability and a bit of insulation from the chilly ground. It's almost like they were channeling their inner civil engineers while simultaneously preparing for a Game of Thrones-style winter. And while we're on the subject of engineering, let's not forget the longhouse's pièce de résistance, the central hearth. This was the heart and heat of the home, a long, narrow fire that ran down the middle of the hall. It served as the primary source of warmth, light, and culinary magic. Over this fire, stews bubbled and meats roasted, filling the space with a smoky, hearty aroma that was as much a part of the Viking experience as their legendary voyages. Granted, ventilation wasn't exactly a Viking strong suit, so the air quality inside was more rustic charm than fresh mountain breeze. But why did these Norse nomads opt for such communal living? It turns out that when winter lasts 6 months, and your neighbours are as likely to raid your village as trade with it, sticking together wasn't just a preference, it was a survival strategy. The longhouse was a fortress of family ties and social bonds where everyone, from the youngest child to the eldest grandparent, had a role. The layouts were designed to accommodate large families, with sleeping areas delineated by little more than a few planks or a curtain. Privacy, much like the warm embrace of a woolen tunic, was a luxury few could afford. As for the materials, wood was the material du jour. Trees were plentiful in the Scandinavian forests, and timber was both a practical and symbolic choice. It represented life and growth, and its abundance made it the obvious go-to. For the Vikings, building with wood wasn't just about practicality, it also connected them to the land and the gods they believed dwelled within it. Stone was used sparingly, often as a foundation or supplemental support, but wood was the true star of the show. Not unlike modern Swedes and their love for flat-pack furniture, the Vikings had a knack for creating versatile, enduring structures from what was readily available. In the grand scheme of things, Viking longhouses were a testament to the Norse ability to adapt and thrive in a challenging environment. They were more than just buildings, they were microcosms of Viking society. The longhouse was where stories were told, alliances were forged, and, yes, sometimes blood feuds were settled. It was a place where practicality met community, where every beam and plank had a purpose, and where the echoes of Viking life still resonate today. So next time you find yourself cursing under your breath while assembling a certain Swedish retailer's bookshelf, Take a moment to appreciate the Longhouse, a structure that was, quite literally, built to last. And so we find ourselves stepping into the bustling, smoky heart of a Viking Longhouse, where the daily grind was as relentless as a Norse winter. Life inside wasn't exactly the idyllic scene of horned helmets and endless feasting that pop culture might have us believe. Though the horns on helmets thing is a myth we'll leave for another day. Here, in these wooden leviathans, cooperation was the name of the game, with just enough room for a dash of Viking independence. Let's kick things off with the communal cooking arrangements. Picture a central hearth, the Longhouse's literal and metaphorical heart crackling away as the Norse equivalent of a slow cooker. It wasn't all roasted boar and buckets of mead, though. The Viking diet was more porridge and fish than pork banquets. Stews simmered with root vegetables, barley, and the catch of the day, while bread, made from whatever grain was available, was a staple. A far cry from the Michelin-starred meals of today, but hey, it kept the Vikings fueled for all that raiding and trading. But who was responsible for cooking up these hearty meals, you ask? Enter the Viking women, who wielded their culinary skills with the same precision as their warrior husbands brandished swords. Women managed much of the household, which meant being the chef, nurse, and all-around goddess of domesticity. It was no small feat, given the lack of modern conveniences, no handy stand mixers or instant pot cookers in sight. Meals were a group effort, with everyone pitching in, ensuring that teamwork made the dream work. And speaking of teamwork, it wasn't just about breaking bread together. The communal meal was a time for bonding, storytelling, and the occasional heated debate. A Viking longhouse without a bit of spirited conversation was as rare as a snowless Scandinavian winter. Now, when it comes to division of labour, the Vikings had it down to a fine art. Chores were shared among the family, and everyone had their role to play. Men tended to the heavy lifting, literally, as they repaired boats, forged weapons, and handled the defence of the homestead. Women, meanwhile, managed the household, crafted textiles, and raised the next generation of Norse adventurers. Children, no strangers to hard work, were expected to help from a young age. It was a well-oiled machine, designed to keep the longhouse running smoothly and everyone fed and warm. And let's not forget the livestock. Yes, those sheep and cows sharing your living space weren't just there for warmth, they were an integral part of the Viking economy. Livestock provided milk, meat, and wool, essentials in a society that valued self-sufficiency. Taking care of these animals was a daily task, one that required diligence and attention, a far cry from the pastoral idyll often portrayed in Viking lore. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite their communal lifestyle, the Vikings weren't exactly the all-for-one, one-for-all type. They valued independence and self-reliance, a trait that was woven into the very fabric of their society. Each family was a unit unto itself, expected to fend for its own while contributing to the greater good. It was a delicate balance between cooperation and autonomy, a dance as intricate as the patterns on a Viking shield. Now, let's tackle that burning question: did Vikings feast like every meal was their last? The short answer is, not exactly. While feasts were indeed a part of Viking culture, they were reserved for special occasions, think weddings, successful raids, or religious festivals. These events were the stuff of legends, with tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, ale flowing freely, and skalds, Norse poets, regaling guests with epic tales. But in everyday life, meals were far more humble, a testament to the Vikings' practical nature. Most days they ate to live, not the other way around. So, why does the myth of the perpetual Viking feast persist? Simple. It's the allure of a grand narrative. The idea of fierce Norsemen living life on the edge, celebrating each day as if it were their last, is undeniably enticing. It paints a picture of a society unburdened by the mundane, one that revels in the here and now. Yet the reality was far more grounded. Vikings were pragmatic, their feasts a momentary escape from the harshness of their world, a chance to celebrate victories both large and small. In the grand tapestry of Viking life, the Longhouse was a microcosm of their society, a place where cooperation thrived alongside fierce individualism. It was a hub of activity, where every chore had a purpose, every meal a story, and every person a role to play. It was a world that balanced the harsh realities of Norse life with the enduring appeal of myth and legend, a testament to a people who embraced the chaos of their world and turned it into a life worth living. And as our journey through the Longhouse continues, we'll delve further into the rich tapestry of Viking life, exploring the rituals, relationships, and realities that shape this fascinating culture. In the intricate dance of Viking life, the Longhouse was more than just a communal hangout. It was the stage where the drama of Norse politics played out. Forget what you've seen in Hollywood movies, it wasn't a perpetual sword fight for dominance. The real struggle for power was more akin to a game of chess, with each member of the household acting as a piece on the board, maneuvering for influence in subtle and strategic ways. At the helm of this wooden ship of domesticity was the chieftain, or the head of the family. This role was less about brute strength and more about savvy leadership. Think less Conan the Barbarian, more CEO of the Year. The chieftain was responsible for maintaining order, protecting the family's assets, and ensuring everyone pulled their weight. It was a role that required a delicate balance of authority and diplomacy, not unlike managing a modern-day startup. The hierarchy within the Longhouse was a reflection of Viking society at large. At the top, you had the free men and women, those who owned land or had enough wealth to afford the luxury of independence. Below them were the thralls or slaves who, despite their lowly status, played a crucial role in the household's economy. It's a stark reminder that even the most fierce and independent societies were built on the backs of those with little power or voice. Thralls were often captured during raids or sold into servitude, and while they could gain their freedom through good service or saving enough wealth, the road was anything but easy. Dispute resolution in the Viking Longhouse was a blend of legal proceedings and personal vendettas, with a touch of melodrama thrown in for good measure. Most conflicts were settled through the Thing, a Norse assembly where free men gathered to debate issues and deliver justice. Picture a cross between a town hall meeting and a courtroom drama where the stakes were high and the outcomes unpredictable. These gatherings were crucial for maintaining order, providing a structured environment where grievances could be aired and resolved without resorting to axes and bloodshed. But, as in any society, not all disputes were handled with such decorum. Sometimes, personal feuds spilled over into the public arena, turning the Thing into something resembling a Viking version of Judge Judy. It wasn't uncommon for disputes to escalate into full-blown feuds, with families taking sides and alliances shifting like the North Sea tides. The Thing offered a venue for negotiation and compromise, but it also highlighted the deep-seated rivalries and personal grudges that simmered beneath the surface of Viking society. Despite the apparent chaos, there was a method to the madness. Viking society was underpinned by a complex web of laws and customs that governed everything from property rights to personal conduct. These laws were passed down orally, memorized by legal experts known as law speakers, who served as the keepers of legal knowledge. In a world where written contracts were as rare as a sunny day in Reykjavik, these law speakers were the human hard drives of their time, ensuring that justice was served and order maintained. And let's not forget about the role of women in this political tapestry. Viking women wielded more influence than their medieval counterparts elsewhere in Europe, with legal rights that included the ability to own property, request a divorce, and even reclaim their dowries. While they weren't exactly marching into the Thing to debate land disputes, their voices carried weight in family matters and community decisions. It's a testament to the surprisingly progressive gender dynamics of Viking society, where women could be powerful players in the Game of Thrones long before HBO made it fashionable. So, what can we learn from the politics of Viking Longhouse living? For starters, the myth of the fiercely independent Viking warrior is only part of the story. Beneath the surface was a society that valued negotiation, strategy, and legal proceedings just as much as it valued physical prowess. The chieftain may have wielded power, but he did so with the consent of his peers and the approval of the Thing, a democratic institution that ensured no one man ruled unchecked. It's a reminder that even in a world where strength was revered, the pen, or in this case, the spoken word, could be mightier than the sword. Of course, the allure of Viking legends persists. The idea of a society where disputes are settled by the clash of axes and the roar of battle is undeniably appealing. It speaks to a primal desire for a world where strength and honor reign supreme, unencumbered by bureaucracy and red tape. Yet, the reality was far more nuanced. The Vikings were not just warriors, they were negotiators, lawmakers, and diplomats, navigating a complex social landscape with as much skill as they navigated the stormy seas. In the end, the politics of Viking Longhouse living was a microcosm of the broader Norse world, a place where power was negotiated, alliances were forged, and disputes were settled through a blend of tradition and innovation. It was a society that thrived on the tension between individual ambition and communal responsibility, a delicate balance that echoes through the ages. As we continue to explore the rich tapestry of Viking life, we'll delve deeper into the rituals, relationships, and realities that shaped this fascinating culture, revealing a world that was as complex and captivating as the myths it spawned. So, stay tuned. There's much more Viking intrigue to unravel. So, as we sail from the political chessboard of Viking society, it's time to tackle the mythic beasts lurking in the waters of our collective imaginations. Let's wade through the fog of legend and see if we can spot the real Vikings amid the horned helmets and pillaging hordes. Spoiler alert, they weren't just a bunch of axe-wielding maniacs with a taste for plunder and a penchant for dramatic entrances. The truth is a bit more nuanced and possibly even more interesting. First up, let's address that iconic image we all know, the horned helmet. The Vikings must have been quite the sight, storming through the mist with those fearsome headpieces, right? Except that's a load of Scandinavisk nonsense. Archaeologists have yet to unearth a single horned helmet from the Viking Age. In reality, Vikings wore simple helmets, often conical and made of iron, without any of the bovine adornments. The horned look was a later invention, courtesy of 19th-century artists who thought it added a dash of Wagnerian flair. So while it's a killer visual, it's as historically accurate as a GPS in a Viking longship. Now, about those longships. Yes, the Vikings were master shipbuilders and navigators, but they weren't just setting sail to plunder distant shores. Sure, raiding was on the agenda, but so was trading and settling. These Norsemen hit the high seas not just with axes, but with trade goods, eager to barter with the locals. This dual role as both traders and raiders is where our modern image of the Viking as a marauding barbarian starts to show its cracks. In truth, many Vikings were as interested in opening new markets as they were in opening enemy fortresses. Let's talk numbers. By around 800 AD, Vikings had begun their seafaring exploits with gusto. Their ships, the famed longships, could sail at speeds of up to 15 knots. That's around 17 mph for the landlubbers. They could carry 60 men or more, each ready to row or raid depending on the day's itinerary. By the 9th century, these ships were regular visitors to the British Isles, the Frankish Empire, and even as far south as North Africa. But it wasn't all swords and shields. Vikings established trade routes that stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Byzantine Empire and beyond. The economic side of the Viking Age is often overshadowed by tales of conquest, but let's put the spotlight on their trading prowess. Vikings were savvy merchants dealing in everything from furs and amber to slaves and walrus ivory. The town of Hedeby, located in present-day Germany, was one of the largest Viking trading hubs, a bustling marketplace where goods from across Europe and Asia changed hands. At its peak, around the 10th century, Hedeby was home to about 500 people, a veritable metropolis by Viking standards. But let's not sugarcoat things. Raiding was indeed a lucrative business. The infamous attack on Lindisfarne in 793 AD is often cited as the beginning of the Viking Age. This was the Norse equivalent of a mic drop, an unexpected and brutal raid on a wealthy monastery that reverberated across Europe. Yet, while this was certainly a high-profile heist, it wasn't the whole story. Most Viking raids were smaller affairs, targeting settlements and coastal towns rather than fortified cities. Now, what about those legendary Viking warriors? Hollywood would have us believe these guys were all 6'5" giants wielding axes the size of small trees. In reality, the average Viking warrior was around 5'7", not exactly towering by today's standards. They were, however, tough as the nails. They didn't use to build their longhouses. Vikings trained in combat from a young age, and their weaponry, though less oversized, was brutally efficient. Swords, axes, and spears were the tools of the trade, and they knew how to use them with deadly precision. The Viking warrior ethos was deeply tied to their belief system. The Norse pantheon was a who's who of deities who celebrated valor and conquest. Warriors who fell in battle were believed to be chosen by the Valkyries to join the god Odin in Valhalla, a sort of eternal warrior's afterlife where the only thing more plentiful than mead was the promise of daily combat. This belief in an afterlife that celebrated martial prowess certainly added a layer of fearlessness to their raids. But were all Vikings hell-bent on Valhalla? Not quite. Many were farmers, craftsmen, and traders who lived relatively peaceful lives. The romantic image of the Viking as a fearless raider was a bit of a PR coup, one that helped the Norse strike fear into the hearts of their enemies. The reality was that most Vikings were more concerned with the business of everyday life, farming, trading, and raising families, than with seeking glory in battle. So, how did the Vikings manage to cultivate such a terrifying reputation? Part of it was their own doing. They knew the power of psychological warfare and used it to their advantage. But much of the myth was built by their victims, monks and chroniclers, understandably biased after having their monasteries looted, painted the Norsemen as godless barbarians. This portrayal stuck, feeding into the legend of the Viking as the quintessential marauder. But let's give credit where it's due, the Vikings were also pioneers of exploration. Before Columbus stumbled upon the New World, Norsemen like Leif Erikson had already reached the shores of North America. Around the year 1000 AD, Erikson and his crew set foot on what is now Newfoundland, a place they called Vinland. This was no small feat, given the primitive navigation tools of the time. Yet, their North American adventure was short-lived, likely due to conflicts with indigenous peoples and the logistical challenges of maintaining a settlement so far from home. In the grand tapestry of history, the Vikings were more than just the sum of their raids. They were explorers who expanded the known world, traders who connected distant lands, and farmers who tilled the unforgiving Nordic soil. While the image of the Viking as a ruthless warrior endures, the truth is that their society was as complex and varied as the seas they sailed. So, next time you picture a Viking, maybe think of them not just as conquerors, but as the original international businessmen and women of the early medieval world. As we continue to unravel the saga of the Vikings, we'll delve deeper into the cultural and social dynamics that shaped this fascinating era. There's still much to explore, from their religious practices to their artistic achievements. So, stay with us as we keep unearthing the reality behind the myths of these legendary Norsemen. And so, as we pull the threads of history through the loom of modern life, let's take a look at how the Viking Longhouse has left its indelible mark on the 21st century. It might surprise you to find that the echoes of these ancient wooden halls resonate not just in museums, but in the very fabric of our current civilization. Buckle up, because it turns out the Vikings were trendsetters long before Instagram made it cool. First, let's talk architecture. The Viking Longhouse was essentially the granddaddy of open-plan living, a layout that's been making a serious comeback in modern homes. And while you won't find cattle lounging in today's living rooms, the idea of multifunctional spaces remains. The concept of communal living and working spaces, which was a necessity in the Viking Age, has been repurposed into a lifestyle choice. Those sleek, minimalist Scandinavian designs you're eyeing for your next home renovation? You can thank the Norse for that. Their use of natural materials, reliance on light, and integration with the landscape are principles that architects still hold dear. What about our social structures? The Vikings' communal living and cooperative society offer a blueprint for modern-day communities and co-housing movements. In an era where urban loneliness is as rampant as overpriced lattes, the Viking way of life, where everyone had a role and a responsibility, offers a compelling model. The Longhouse was a place where human connections were forged and maintained in the most tangible way. It's a stark contrast to our digital interactions, where liking a post is sometimes mistaken for genuine social engagement. And then there's pop culture. The Vikings have stormed the gates of Hollywood, Netflix, and beyond, capturing imaginations with their larger-than-life tales. Shows like Vikings and movies like How to Train Your Dragon have breathed new life into these Norse legends, albeit with a fair bit of creative licensing. This modern portrayal of Vikings often straddles the line between historical accuracy and entertainment value. But hey, who doesn't love a good story, right? But what would the Vikings themselves think of these portrayals? Imagine them binge-watching their on-screen doppelgangers, probably with a mix of pride and bemusement. Not bad, they'd mutter. But where are the scenes of us painstakingly crafting textiles or debating land disputes over the thing? Sure, the allure of the Viking warrior is irresistible, but the reality was that these were complex people with a penchant for exploration as much as for combat. The TV version often skips over the subtleties, like their role as negotiators and traders, which were just as pivotal in shaping their legacy. Let's not forget the economic lessons from our Norse friends. The Vikings were pioneers in what we might call disruptive innovations today. They didn't just conquer, they connected. Their trade networks spread ideas, goods, and even genetics across continents, laying the groundwork for the interconnected world we know now. The exchange of goods and culture between the Vikings and the rest of the world was a precursor to globalization, albeit without the convenience of air miles or online banking. And here's a fun fact, the legacy of Viking currency. They didn't have a standardized coinage system. Instead, they used what was called hack silver, literally hacked up bits of silver weighed to determine value. It's the medieval version of paying in Bitcoin, with a bit more heft in your pocket. This flexible approach to currency shows a sophisticated understanding of economics that's echoed in today's complex trading systems. But, as we wrap this up, let's not forget the myth-busting. The romantic image of the Viking as the ultimate free spirit, unfettered by societal norms, is a bit of a gilded lie. The reality was harsh, the winters long, and survival often hinged on cooperation and compromise. The Longhouse was a microcosm of this reality, a place where practicality met community. It was far from the idyllic scenes painted in our cultural imagination, but that's precisely what makes it so fascinating. In conclusion, as we sit in our air-conditioned homes, streaming Viking dramas on our smart TVs, let's spare a thought for those who lived it first. The Vikings may not have had Netflix, but their stories continue to captivate us, a testament to the enduring appeal of their legacy. And who knows, maybe a millennium from now, some future historian will binge-watch our era, chuckling at the myths we leave behind. Until then, let's raise a glass to the Norse, the ultimate influencers of their time, who shaped our world in more ways than a simple raid or a horned helmet ever could. School. How about this for a wild piece of trivia? Long before anyone was posting selfies with sacred cows or stacking rocks in their backyard for good vibes, the ancient Sumerians were already deep into mystical practices that would make your local yoga instructor seem like an amateur. These folks weren't just the first urban civilization on record, they were the OGs of spiritual multitasking. We're talking about a pantheon of gods that could fill up a stadium faster than a BTS concert, each deity with a resume thicker than a phone book. Now, let's talk about the Sumerian gods, who were like the ultimate squad of divine personalities. There was Anu, the sky god, who was essentially the Zeus of his time, minus the lightning bolts. Enlil, the god of air, had a knack for deciding the fate of cities, much like a capricious landlord. Then there was Inanna, goddess of love and war, because why not multitask? She was the original femme fatale, straddling the line between passion and destruction. They even had a water god, Enki, who was all about wisdom and magic, a sort of mystical Steve Jobs, if you will. Forget about the simple pray and hope model. These Sumerians were into full-on divine networking. They would offer sacrifices, from food to livestock, because apparently gods from any era appreciate a good steak. The economics behind these offerings were fascinating. Temples operated like early corporations, with priests as their CEOs, and boy did these guys know how to turn a profit. We're talking about a system where temples were landowners, employers, and tax collectors. If you think modern bureaucracy is tough, try navigating the intricate temple dues and tributes of Sumer. It was a theocratic hustle, with priests wielding the kind of influence that would make a modern-day influencer blush. Now, before you start thinking these temple priests were just in it for the freebies, it's worth noting that their roles were as demanding as a 24/7 tech startup. They were responsible for interpreting the gods' whims, a task that involved reading omens from everything, animal entrails to the patterns of oil on water. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of data scientists, minus the cushy office perks and stock options. Their job was to keep the gods, and by extension, society, in a state of cosmic balance. Fail at that, and you could expect a divine smackdown in the form of floods, droughts, or worse, plummeting barley prices. The Sumerian religious economy was both a spiritual and a financial enterprise, where the line between worship and commerce blurred faster than a Vegas magic trick. Temples amassed wealth not just from offerings but also from trading and lending activities. They were the medieval equivalent of a Swiss bank, except with more incense and fewer leather chairs. What's particularly interesting is how these mystical practices laid the groundwork for later religious traditions. The Sumerians weren't just throwing gold at the gods. They were crafting the narrative of cosmic order, a precursor to the structured religions that would follow. This was spirituality with a side of pragmatism, a kind of divine insurance policy to keep life from spiraling into chaos. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the allure of ancient mysticism is undeniable, the reality was often harsh. These practices were as much about control as they were about faith. They reinforced social hierarchies, with the god-favoured priestly class sitting pretty at the top. The common folk had to navigate a labyrinth of rituals and offerings, hoping their meagre sacrifices would curry favour with beings who probably had better things to do than worry about the next harvest. Despite the heavy-handed theocracy, the Sumerians managed to create a vibrant civilization, pioneering everything from writing to beer brewing. Their mystical practices, bizarre as they might seem today, were a cornerstone of their success. They fused faith with practicality, engineering a worldview that resonated with the cosmic and the mundane. So next time you're lighting a candle for good luck or considering a little spiritual guidance from your horoscope, remember the Sumerians were doing it millennia ago, and they had a whole pantheon to back them up. Their world was a tapestry of gods and rituals, economics and spirituality, all woven together in a way that still leaves us in awe. And while their temples have crumbled and their gods have faded into myth, the legacy of their mystical practices continues to echo through the corridors of history. Now, speaking of rituals that would make even the most committed yoga enthusiast break a sweat, let's dive headfirst into the magical brew that was Sumerian mysticism. Picture a world where potions and spells were as ubiquitous as your morning espresso run. Yep, the Sumerians had a little something special for every occasion. Got a headache? Here's a potion for that. Need to ensure your crops aren't decimated by locusts? Grab your spellbook. But before you start envisioning Hogwarts in the desert, let's get real about what these mystical practices actually involved. Contrary to the Hollywood version of ancient magic, the Sumerians weren't waving wands and yelling Expelliarmus at their problems. Instead, their magical repertoire was a mix of practical remedies and hopeful incantations, more akin to early pharmaceutical experiments than wizarding duels. First off, let's talk about potions. These concoctions were the precursors to modern medicine, albeit with a dash of mystique. Ingredients ranged from the mundane, like herbs and oils, to the downright peculiar. Think snake skins and bat wings. And while these might sound like components from a witch's shopping list, there was often a method to the madness. Take, for instance, willow bark, which the Sumerians used for pain relief. Little did they know this bark contains salicin, a chemical cousin to aspirin. It's like they stumbled upon effective medicine while trying to impress the gods. Spells, on the other hand, were the Sumerians' way of putting a little cosmic insurance on their worldly troubles. These weren't just random mumblings, but carefully curated phrases, often recited in the lilting tones of Sumerian, like a Spotify playlist for divine intervention. They were mostly about protection, warding off evil spirits, ensuring good harvests, or keeping the peace at home. If it sounds like wishful thinking, that's because it often was. The appeal lay in the act of doing something, anything, to exert control over the unpredictable whims of fate. Of course, behind every magical practice was a priest or a priestess pulling the strings. These folks were the gatekeepers of mystical knowledge, and they played their roles with the gravitas of a tech guru at an Apple keynote. They knew that keeping the populace enchanted required a delicate balance of mystery and accessibility. This is where the economic context of magic comes into play. Spells and potions were not just spiritual endeavors, they were commodities. Priests would sell these mystical solutions for a price, effectively running a side hustle that was as much about business as it was about belief. Now, here's where we bust a few myths. The idea that Sumerian magic could defy the laws of nature is more fiction than fact. The reality was that these practices were deeply rooted in the tangible world. They often served as early forms of science and medicine, albeit wrapped in the comforting cloak of the supernatural. It was a way to explain the unexplainable, to find order amidst chaos. And while some might dismiss this as mere superstition, it provided structure and solace in a world where uncertainty was the only certainty. But let's not forget the allure of these practices. The romance of magic lies not in its efficacy, but in its promise of hope and transformation. In a time when life was often brutal and short, who wouldn't want to believe in a little magic to tip the scales in their favor? It's this duality of practical use and emotional comfort that makes Sumerian magic so compelling. So, the next time you find yourself reaching for a self-help book or reciting an affirmation, remember the Sumerians were doing it first, and they had a whole system to back it up. Their world was a blend of the mystical and the mundane, a testament to the human desire to believe in something greater than ourselves. Tune in next time as we unravel more of these ancient mysteries, where the lines between myth and reality blur like a mirage in the desert sun. So, speaking of how Sumerian magic was as much about the mind as it was the mystique, let's dive into the lives of those who wielded these mystical powers like ancient rock stars. Meet the Sumerian mystics and shamans, the folks who could walk into a room and immediately capture everyone's attention. Not just because they were dressed like they raided a theatrical costume department, but because they had a hotline to the heavens. These were the people who lived in the liminal space between the ethereal and the everyday, navigating roles that were as complex as a modern-day tech entrepreneur's ever-expanding LinkedIn profile. Now, you might be wondering, what did it take to become a Sumerian shaman or mystic? Was there a Hogwarts-style invitation, complete with a parchment scroll and a mystical pet owl? Well, not quite. The path to becoming one of these mystical maestros was more convoluted than a plot twist in a Christopher Nolan movie. For starters, many of these individuals were born into their roles, often hailing from families that had been practicing the art of divine connection for generations. It was a bit like inheriting the family business, except instead of selling shoes or accounting services, you were offering spiritual enlightenment and occasionally a potion that tasted suspiciously like mud. But let's not romanticize their lives too much. These mystics weren't just gliding around in robes, basking in the adulation of their followers. Their roles were as demanding as they were prestigious. They had to interpret dreams, perform rituals, and concoct potions, all while keeping an ear out for the latest gossip from the divine realm. You could say they were multitasking before it was cool, juggling responsibilities that could make a Silicon Valley CEO break into a cold sweat. The social clout of these mystics was undeniable. They were the original influencers, wielding a sort of charisma that made them both feared and revered. People would travel miles, braving the harsh Mesopotamian sun and the occasional sandstorm just to get a glimpse of their magical prowess. And, much like the modern influencer, these mystics knew how to monetize their fame. Their services didn't come cheap. A consultation could cost a small fortune, measured in bushels of barley or heads of livestock. This wasn't just spiritual guidance, it was a financial transaction, a barter system where belief met commerce. Politically, these mystics were no lightweights either. They often held sway over kings and chieftains, advising on matters ranging from war strategies to agricultural plans. Picture this. You're a king, trying to decide whether to go to war with your neighbor over that pesky border dispute. Who do you call? Not your general, but your trusted shaman, who might just be able to foresee the outcome by examining the entrails of a goat or interpreting the flight patterns of birds. It was a symbiotic relationship. Rulers got a divine stamp of approval for their decisions, and the mystics received protection and patronage. It was a win-win, provided the prophecies didn't backfire. But let's pull back the curtain a bit. While these mystics were undoubtedly revered, they were also under constant scrutiny. Fail to deliver on a prophecy, and you could find yourself out of favor faster than you could say divine intervention. Skepticism was as prevalent then as it is now, and a shaman whose predictions went awry might find their career prospects dwindling faster than a viral TikTok trend. In a society where spiritual practices were deeply entwined with everyday life, the stakes were high and the pressure to maintain accuracy was immense. Now, let's talk about the not-so-glamorous side of this mystical profession, the snake oil salesmanship. Just like today, not every so-called expert lived up to their billing. Some mystics were more about the show than the substance, peddling remedies that were more about placebo than power. Think of them as the ancient world's version of a dodgy wellness influencer, promising miracle cures that were more likely to empty your coffers than cure your ills. These charlatans thrived on the desperation and hope of their clients, selling dreams wrapped in the guise of divine intervention. But even this snake oil side hustle had its appeal. In a world where the unpredictable was the norm, be it floods, famines, or invasions. A little hope, even if misguided, was worth its weight in gold. And let's face it, who doesn't want to believe in a little magic when times are tough? The allure of a quick fix, the promise of a better crop yield or a healed ailment, was too tempting to resist. It's a testament to human nature's eternal optimism, the desire to believe in something greater, even if it's just a cleverly marketed potion. So, while these mystics and shamans were indeed the rock stars of their time, their lives were a complex dance of power, prestige, and the occasional con. Their influence stretched far and wide, but it was a double-edged sword, with prestige often accompanied by pressure and scrutiny. As we peel back the layers of their world, it becomes clear that their legacy is as much about the human condition as it is about the divine. In their stories, we see a reflection of our own, our desire for connection, our search for meaning, and our eternal hope for a little magic in the mundane. As we journey further into the mystical practices of ancient Sumer, stay tuned to uncover more tales of enchantment and reality, where belief and business, the sacred and the profane, continue to weave a story that resonates through the ages. As we journey further into the mystical practices of ancient Sumer, we find ourselves at the crossroads of science and superstition, a place where logic and the ethereal took turns driving the chariot of human understanding. Now, if you think modern society has a monopoly on cognitive dissonance, think again. The Sumerians were the original masters of embracing contradiction, managing to chart the heavens with precision while still consulting those same stars for celestial gossip. Take their pioneering work in astronomy, for instance. These folks were like the original stargazers, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become astrophysics. They meticulously mapped the night sky, observing the movements of planets and stars with a degree of accuracy that would make even NASA blush. We're talking about the kind of star maps that would put your astrology app to shame, complete with constellations and celestial events recorded on clay tablets that have survived millennia. Their observations weren't just about keeping track of the cosmos, they were crucial for agricultural and religious calendars. When should you plant your barley? Which day is most auspicious for a sacrifice to Inanna? The stars held the answers. Yet, here's where the plot thickens. Despite their scientific prowess, the Sumerians were equally invested in the mystical whispers of the cosmos. While they could predict a lunar eclipse with the precision of a Swiss watch, they'd also turn around and read those celestial events as omens. A solar eclipse wasn't just a predictable astronomical event, it was a potential harbinger of doom, a cosmic memo that the gods were displeased. The irony is almost poetic. Here were people with the mathematical chops to calculate planetary cycles, yet they still believed the universe was sending them cryptic messages about their earthly affairs. And speaking of mathematics, let's not forget that the Sumerians were the ones who gifted us with the sexagesimal system. Yes, the very reason we have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. This base 60 system was a testament to their mathematical genius, allowing them to perform complex calculations that would lay the groundwork for future civilizations. They used these skills to solve practical problems, from dividing land among farmers to constructing ziggurats that towered over the Mesopotamian plains like ancient skyscrapers. But while they were busy crunching numbers and developing algorithms that would have made Archimedes proud, they were also consulting priests to interpret dreams and omens. It's as if they were living in two worlds at once, one of empirical observation and another of mystical interpretation. Imagine having the ability to calculate the area of a field with pinpoint accuracy, and then turning around to ask a priest whether the pattern of bird flight you just saw is a sign you should take that trip to Babylon. It's a bit like Albert Einstein pausing his theory of relativity to check his horoscope for travel advice. This duality wasn't just a quirk of their civilization, it was woven into the very fabric of their society. The Sumerians understood that life was unpredictable and often harsh. Floods, droughts, and invasions were regular features in the Mesopotamian landscape. In a world so fraught with uncertainty, blending science with superstition offered a sense of security. The logical mind could solve immediate problems, but the mystical provided comfort and hope, a way to make sense of the senseless. Socially, this interplay between science and superstition cemented the power of the priestly class. These individuals were the gatekeepers of both astronomical knowledge and divine wisdom. They were like the ultimate double majors, holding degrees in both astrophysics and theology. It was a potent mix that kept them at the center of Sumerian life, guiding everything from agricultural practices to political decisions. Need to know if a military campaign would be successful? Better consult the priest, who can both read the skies and interpret the entrails of a goat. Economically, this dual approach was a stroke of genius. The temples became centers of learning, attracting scholars and scribes who recorded their astronomical observations and mathematical discoveries on clay tablets. These tablets were both educational tools and economic assets, traded and valued for their knowledge. Meanwhile, the mystical practices provided a steady stream of income, as people paid for rituals, omens, and consultations. The blend of science and superstition was a financial boon, ensuring the temple's coffers were as full as their libraries. Now, you might be tempted to dismiss the mystical side as mere superstition, but consider this. It was precisely this blend of the logical and the magical that allowed the Sumerians to thrive. Their ability to embrace both realms meant they weren't limited by the constraints of either. They could innovate and adapt, using their scientific knowledge to solve practical problems while relying on their mystical beliefs to navigate the uncertainties of life. And isn't that the irony of it all? At a time when we often draw strict lines between science and superstition, the Sumerians remind us that human understanding doesn't always fit into neat categories. Sometimes the very things we see as contradictions are the elements that weave together the complex tapestry of human experience. Their legacy is a testament to the power of duality, the ability to hold two seemingly opposing truths and find wisdom in the balance. So as you ponder the mysteries of the universe, whether through the lens of a telescope or the lines of your palm, remember that the Sumerians were doing it millennia ago. They looked to the stars for guidance and found both scientific and spiritual truths, crafting a worldview that resonates with our own search for meaning. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigmatic practices of this ancient civilization, where the lines between logic and magic blur like the shifting sands of their vast deserts. And speaking of unraveling enigmas, let's dive into how the mystical and mathematical legacy of the Sumerians set the stage for future civilizations. You see, the Sumerians were the Da Vinci's of their time, blending art with algebra, magic with methodology. Their contributions didn't just vaporize like a genie's smoke ring, they laid the groundwork for societies that followed. Take the Babylonians, for example. These folks were the Sumerian fanboys who took the baton and sprinted with it. They expanded on Sumerian mathematics and astronomy, turning clay tablets into a comprehensive library of celestial wisdom. Ever heard of the Code of Hammurabi? Sure, it's more famous for its eye for an eye justice approach, but its creation was heavily influenced by the structured, organized way the Sumerians approached their laws and economy. Babylonian scribes took a page, literally from Sumerian tablets, to build one of history's first written legal codes. They didn't just copy homework, they improved it. Then there were the Assyrians, who took Sumerian religious practices and gave them a militaristic makeover. The Assyrians were the rock stars of organized warfare, but when they weren't busy expanding empires, they were busy expanding temples. They borrowed the Sumerian concept of divine kingship, where rulers were seen as earthly shadows of a celestial reality. It added a layer of divine right that made their conquests feel less like aggressive expansion and more like ordained destiny. The Egyptians? Oh, they were busy building pyramids, but guess what? They too were influenced by the Sumerian knack for combining religion and governance. The idea of a pharaoh as a god-king? Sumerian roots are all over that. Even their calendar, so crucial for planning those epic pyramid projects, was tuned by astronomical observations that would make any Sumerian priest proud. And what about the Greeks? You know, the guys who get all the credit for inventing Western philosophy. They were essentially the Sumerians' intellectual grandchildren. Pythagoras and his buddies looked up to Babylonian astronomers, who, in turn, were standing on the shoulders of Sumerian stargazers. The Greeks might have been the ones to brand it with their names, but the Sumerians were the unsung heroes who first asked, "Hey, what's up there?" But let's not just marvel at the ripples across civilizations. What's truly mind-boggling is how these Sumerian practices resonate with us today. Sure, we may not be sacrificing goats to appease Inanna, but had we ever checked your horoscope before a big meeting? Or maybe you've turned to a self-help book for a little existential clarity. These modern rituals are echoes of ancient Sumer, where the line between science and spirituality was as blurred as a watercolor painting. Economically speaking, the Sumerians knew the value of diversification before it became a Wall Street buzzword. Their temples weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic powerhouses. Think of them as the Amazon of the ancient world, minus the prime delivery. They managed land, collected taxes, and controlled the flow of goods. These temples were the beating hearts of Sumerian cities, a concept that would be borrowed and tweaked by future empires who understood that controlling religion meant controlling the people. Socially, their practices reinforced hierarchies in a way that would make even the most bureaucratic HR department impressed. Priests and rulers shared power in a cozy alliance, creating a structure where the divine and the political were indistinguishable. This model of governance, where spiritual and temporal power reinforced each other, became a template for imperial structures across the globe, from the Roman Empire to the Byzantine Church state complex. But here's the kicker. Despite their ancient pedigree, the Sumerians were surprisingly modern in their outlook. They understood that life was a series of unpredictable events, and their blend of science and superstition was a pragmatic approach to navigating this uncertainty. Their world was one of constant change, and their practices reflected a deep understanding of adaptability. In a sense, we're still grappling with the same challenges today, trying to balance rationality with belief, logic with faith. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Sumerian mysticism, let's take a moment to appreciate their legacy. In a world where the mystical and the mundane coexisted, these ancient innovators laid the groundwork for future civilizations to thrive. They were the original architects of a worldview that embraced complexity, and their influence reverberates through history like the echoes of a long-forgotten hymn. And while their gods may have faded into the annals of myth, the spirit of their practices lives on. We might package it differently, call it science or spirituality, but the essence remains the same. A quest for understanding in a universe that often feels unfathomable. So the next time you find yourself marveling at the stars or pondering the mysteries of life, remember, the Sumerians were there first, asking the same questions, seeking the same answers. Their legacy is a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, the pursuit of knowledge and belief is a journey worth taking. So, dust off your metaphorical clay tablet and keep exploring. The adventure is just beginning. In the cradle of Western philosophy, where the sea whispered secrets to anyone willing to listen, Anaximander took his first breath in 610 BCE in the lively city of Miletus. Now, if you think you've got a noisy neighborhood, try growing up in a place where the air is thick with the scent of olive oil and wool, and traders shout over each other like they're auditioning for a Greek tragedy. This bustling hub was the Silicon Valley of ancient thinking, a melting pot of ideas fueled by the relentless flow of commerce and conversation. Miletus wasn't just any city. It was the rock star of the Ionian League, boasting 24 satellite towns and a cultural vibrancy that could rival any modern metropolis. And let's be honest, if you had to pick a place to birth a philosophical genius, you'd want somewhere with a little razzle-dazzle. The city was strategically perched on the western coast of Anatolia, a prime spot for merchants to swap goods and sailors to swap tales, ensuring that young Anaximander grew up with a worldview as wide as the Aegean Sea. Enter Thales of Miletus, the wise old owl of mathematics and philosophy, who would soon become Anaximander's mentor. Picture Thales as the Mr. Miyagi of ancient Greece, minus the karate, but with plenty of waxing philosophical. Thales was the kind of guy who, when he wasn't busy predicting solar eclipses like the one in 585 BCE that stopped a war between the Lydians and the Medes, was pondering the essence of water as the fundamental substance of the universe. It was under Thales's tutelage that Anaximander would begin to question everything, from the stars to the earth beneath his feet, probably much to the chagrin of anyone trying to have a simple conversation with him. Anaximander wasn't content with just sipping on the philosophical Kool-Aid. He wanted to brew his own. He took Thales's ideas and ran with them, and by ran, I mean he exploded onto the scene with theories that were as audacious as they were groundbreaking. Imagine being the first person to suggest that the Earth is neither flat nor held up by giant turtles, but rather a free-floating entity, a cosmic island surrounded by a vast, limitless expanse. That's right, Anaximander basically told everyone that the Earth was flying solo in space and probably had a smug grin on his face while doing so. And then there was the whole mapping the world thing. Anaximander wasn't just doodling in the sand, he was attempting to sketch the first ever map of the known world. Sure, by today's standards it might look like a toddler's art project, but back then it was revolutionary. He envisioned a circular Earth surrounded by oceans, with Miletus conveniently at the centre, naturally. This was a time when most people still thought the Earth was flat as a pita, so you can imagine the kind of heated debates his ideas sparked over a jug of wine, or three. His notion of the apeiron, or the infinite, was another mind-bender. Anaximander theorized that everything emerged from this boundless, indefinite primordial substance, a sort of cosmic soup that defied the neat categories of earth, water, air, and fire. It was like he was running a philosophical food truck, serving up a hot take that left traditionalists scratching their heads and some probably choking on their olives. But let's not romanticize too much. For all his brilliance, Anaximander lived in a world where you couldn't just tweet your ideas or publish a paper. You had to convince people face to face, often in the agora, where the only thing more pervasive than the smell of fish was the stubbornness of public opinion. It was a time of oral tradition, where being a philosopher meant having the charisma to draw a crowd and the wit to keep them from nodding off, a skill Anaximander apparently mastered. So here he was, a man ahead of his time in a city that was just as much a character in his story as he was. Miletus was the kind of place that could make or break you, where the sounds of the marketplace mixed with the clanging of philosophical debate, and where a young thinker could dream of mapping the cosmos, one daring idea at a time. Anaximander was just getting started, fueled by the vibrant chaos of his hometown and a fierce determination to chart the unknown, not just of the earth, but of the universe itself. Amidst the cacophony of Miletus, where the air was as thick with ideas as it was with the aroma of grilled fish, Anaximander, ever the rebellious thinker, was busy dismantling the cozy myths of the past. You know, the kind that said Earth was cradled by Atlas or floating on a cosmic sea turtle like some ancient Greek fairy tale. But Anaximander wasn't buying it. Nope, not for a drachma. Instead, he envisioned Earth as a cosmic island, adrift in an infinite expanse, totally unsupported by anything tangible. Picture this, a world where the ground beneath your feet isn't tethered to anything, just hanging out in space, like it's got nowhere better to be. Now, you might think that's a pretty bold claim for someone in the 6th century BCE, and you'd be right. Anaximander's contemporaries probably looked at him like he'd just suggested Zeus was actually a fan of toga parties. Outlandish and a tad blasphemous. But Anaximander wasn't just throwing cosmic spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. He was laying the groundwork for a new way of seeing the universe, one that didn't rely on mythical creatures or gods to explain the unexplainable. His idea of the apeiron, the boundless, was the cornerstone of this radical vision. Imagine a primordial soup that defied all categorization, a kind of cosmic soup kitchen where the universe ladled out stars, planets, and everything in between. Anaximander proposed that everything came from this undefined, infinite source and would eventually return to it. It's as if he looked at the 4 classical elements, earth, water, air, fire, and said, nah, there's something bigger out there. Now, whether this was a stroke of genius or just an impressive philosophical gamble, it certainly got people talking. Imagine the agora, a bustling hub of gossip and debate, buzzing with the latest from Anaximander's mind. Traders and philosophers alike must have debated over wine and olives, their conversations as lively as a modern Twitter thread. Sure, some thought he'd been standing in the Aegean sun a bit too long, but others were captivated by this vision of an unlimited cosmos, one where the earth wasn't the center of everything. In this vibrant milieu, Anaximander was like a rock star philosopher with a new hit theory that was as catchy as it was controversial. And while he didn't have the luxury of a YouTube channel to spread his ideas, his thoughts on the universe's boundless nature resonated far beyond the shores of Miletus. It was an intellectual revolution, challenging the status quo and moving away from anthropomorphic deities dictating the whims of nature. Let's not forget, this was an era where explaining natural phenomena often involved invoking the temperamental moods of gods. Thunder? Clearly Zeus having a bad day. But Anaximander dared to question this divine explanation. suggesting that natural processes could be understood through observation and reason rather than mythology. In a world where lightning could be a celestial temper tantrum, Anaximander's approach was as audacious as it was ahead of its time. Think about the courage it took to stand in a crowded marketplace and challenge the divine narrative. Anaximander's vision suggested that the universe operated according to natural laws, not the whims of capricious gods. It was like telling a room full of die-hard fans that their favorite rock band didn't write their biggest hit. Shocking, to say the least. Economically, Miletus thrived on trade, and its prosperity depended on understanding the natural world better than the competition, predicting weather patterns, navigating the seas. Anaximander's theories, while deeply philosophical, had practical implications. They hinted at a universe governed by order, one that could be understood and, perhaps, manipulated for human benefit. In a sense, Anaximander was offering an ancient version of the scientific method. Look at the stars, study the tides, and maybe, just maybe, you'll uncover the secrets of the Apeiron. This wasn't just idle speculation. It was an invitation to see the world through a lens of inquiry and evidence. Anaximander's legacy was a call to arms for future thinkers to explore the cosmos without the crutch of myth, setting the stage for a scientific revolution that would unfurl over the centuries. His ideas hinted at the potential power of human reason to decode the mysteries of the universe, a narrative that would echo through the halls of history long after Miletus's marketplace had fallen silent. In this way, Anaximander wasn't just a product of his vibrant city, he was a catalyst for a new way of thinking. He urged his contemporaries to look beyond the horizon of what was known, to question the nature of existence itself. And while his theories might not have been perfect, no GPS coordinates for the Apeiron, after all, they were a bold step forward. They were an invitation to explore a universe that was as boundless as the human imagination, a cosmos where the earth floated freely, like an idea waiting to be realized. So, as you picture Anaximander strolling through the bustling streets of Miletus, perhaps with a philosophical twinkle in his eye, remember that he was more than a thinker, he was a visionary. His ideas, like the boundless universe he imagined, continue to float through the corridors of time, challenging us to see the world not as it is, but as it could be, if only we dare to look. As Anaximander ambled through Miletus, perhaps with a philosophical twinkle in his eye, his mind wasn't just on the stars or the winds, but on something more down to earth, literally. The world, as known to the Greeks, was a sprawling mystery of land and sea, and Anaximander had a burning desire to chart it, to bring order to its chaos. This was no small feat in a time when most folks thought the horizon was merely the end of the earth, possibly where you might just fall off into the void. But Anaximander, ever the intrepid intellectual, wasn't buying into this cosmic cliff theory. Instead, he decided to sketch one of the earliest world maps, an audacious move akin to drawing a map on a napkin without Google Earth to back you up. Now, before you get too excited, let's set the record straight. Anaximander's map wasn't exactly National Geographic material. Picture a circular blob with Miletus smack dab in the middle, oceans swirling around the edges, and land masses that look like a toddler's attempt at finger painting. Sure, it's easy to snicker at its simplicity from our GPS-guided perch in the 21st century, but back then, this was a mind-bending leap. Imagine trying to map a world when the farthest anyone's travelled is probably just a few hundred miles away, and the only guide you've got is the gossip from sailors and merchants over a pitcher of wine. The map itself, according to later accounts, placed the known world in a circular form, with Europe and Asia on either side of Miletus. It's like he was saying, hey, what if we put us right here in the middle? The Mediterranean, a critical highway for trade and travel, snaked through the centre, while the mysterious lands of the north and south remained little more than whispers on the wind. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A bold declaration that the world was a coherent entity that could be comprehended and, perhaps, conquered. Let's talk about the reality behind the legend. Anaximander's map, as groundbreaking as it was, wasn't the first time someone tried to depict the earth. The Babylonians, those ancient Mesopotamian mathematicians, had been doodling on clay tablets centuries earlier. But Anaximander's contribution was different. It wasn't just about showing where things were, but understanding why they were there. He introduced the idea of scale and proportion, rudimentary though they were, in a way that suggested the earth wasn't just a random sprawl of land and water, but a place with order and structure. This wasn't just about satisfying intellectual curiosity. There was a practical edge to Anaximander's work. Miletus was a bustling trade hub, and maps were invaluable tools for merchants plotting their next venture across the Aegean or further afield. Knowing the lay of the land or sea could mean the difference between a successful voyage and a shipwreck, between profit and loss. In a place where commerce was king and drachmas were the lifeblood of the city, Anaximander's map was more than a philosophical statement, it was a potential economic boon. But let's not pretend his contemporaries were all on board with this cartographic revolution. Skepticism was as common as sandals in ancient Greece, and Anaximander's map probably raised as many eyebrows as it did questions. Imagine trying to convince a bunch of sailors, who swore they'd seen the edge of the world, that the earth was a self-contained sphere adrift in an infinite ocean. It was like telling a bunch of flat earthers that the world was, in fact, round. Cue the debates, the disbelief, and probably a fair bit of eye-rolling. Yet, despite the critics and the skeptics, Anaximander's ideas didn't just fade into the Aegean sunset. His map laid the groundwork for future thinkers, paving the way for the likes of Hecataeus and Herodotus, who would build on his legacy. Anaximander's map, incomplete as it was, sparked a geographical curiosity that would eventually lead to more sophisticated understandings of the world. It was the first step on a journey that would take centuries to complete, culminating in the detailed cartography we take for granted today. So, was Anaximander's map a triumph or a toddler's scribble? Let's call it a bit of both. It was a bold attempt to understand the world in a new way, to move beyond the myths and legends and chart a course based on observation and reason. It was a testament to human curiosity, to the desire to explore and understand, even when the tools at hand were little more than a stick in the dirt. In the grand tapestry of history, Anaximander's map might seem like a mere footnote, a quaint relic of a bygone era. But in the context of his time, it was revolutionary. It was an invitation to think beyond the horizon, to imagine a world that was interconnected and fathomable, not just a collection of disconnected tales spun by sailors and traders. And while Anaximander didn't have the benefit of satellite images or GPS, he had something arguably more powerful, the courage to question, the audacity to dream, and the wisdom to know that even the most primitive map could point the way to a greater understanding of the world. As we continue to peel back the layers of Anaximander's life and legacy, let's remember that his contributions to geography and cartography were just one part of his expansive vision. He wasn't merely interested in drawing lines on a map. He was driven by a deeper quest to comprehend the nature of reality itself. His work was a starting point, a catalyst for a cascade of ideas that would ripple through the ages, challenging each subsequent generation to look beyond the horizon and imagine what lies beyond. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth pondering as we prepare to dive deeper into the philosophical waters of Anaximander's world. As we sail away from the shores of Anaximander's geographical musings, let's dive into the deep waters of his biological theories. Anaximander wasn't just content with mapping the world, he was also keen on figuring out how all those creatures scuttling, swimming and flying around had come to be. Picture yourself in ancient Miletus, where instead of a safari, you might catch a philosopher's lecture on the origins of life. Now, let's be clear, Anaximander didn't have a microscope or a lab coat. What he did have was a mind willing to challenge the status quo. Imagine sitting in the agora, the sun beating down, as he posits that life began in the water. Yes, water. Anaximander theorized that the first creatures emerged from moist elements, suggesting that life crawled out of the primordial ooze. This wasn't just a philosophical ponderance, it was the ancient precursor to evolutionary theory. Anaximander dared to suggest that humans evolved from fish-like creatures. That's right, even before Darwin had his eureka moment, Anaximander was hinting at the idea of evolution. How did he come up with such a notion? Well, he observed that all animals came from eggs, but humans seemed a bit too helpless at birth to have survived in the wild right off the bat. So, perhaps we started as something else, something more adaptable to the harsh realities of the natural world. It's like Anaximander was peeking into a crystal ball, decades ahead of his time, or a few millennia to be precise. Of course, these ideas weren't just pulled out of thin air. They were shaped by the intellectual climate of Miletus, a hub for trade and idea exchange. The city's bustling ports weren't just for goods, but also for thoughts, as sailors and traders brought tales of exotic lands and creatures. This melting pot of ideas provided fertile ground for Anaximander's musings. Imagine the conversations over wine and cheese, with the air filled with talk of strange animals and distant lands. It was this rich tapestry of cultural exchange that allowed Anaximander's theories to take root. But let's not put Anaximander on too high a pedestal. His ideas, while revolutionary, were still a mix of sharp insights and speculative leaps. Without the benefit of modern science, he was left to puzzle over natural phenomena with little more than observation and a dash of imagination. For instance, he believed that thunder and lightning were caused by wind trapped in clouds, a charming notion that Zeus might have found amusing. Yet, this commitment to natural explanations marked a significant departure from mythological interpretations. Fast forward to today, and Anaximander's embryonic ideas about evolution and the origin of life still echo in the corridors of science. While he didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle, we're talking a few missing edges and corners, his willingness to question and hypothesize was a precursor to the scientific method. It's a reminder that sometimes it's the bold questions that matter more than the answers themselves. In the grand scheme of ancient Greece, Anaximander was a bit of a rock star. He didn't just accept the myths and legends passed down through oral tradition, he challenged them, offering alternative narratives that were as captivating as they were controversial. In a world where explaining the natural world often involved invoking the whims of gods, Anaximander's theories were a breath of fresh air, or perhaps a gust of wind through the clouds, if you prefer his meteorological musings. So, how did these ideas flourish in ancient Greece? Miletus, with its vibrant intellectual scene, was a breeding ground for innovation. The city's prosperity was built on trade, and understanding the natural world wasn't just academic, it was economically advantageous. Predicting the weather, understanding the sea currents, and knowing the habits of animals could all translate into tangible benefits, like not losing your entire cargo to a surprise storm. But let's not romanticize too much. Anaximander's world was one where ideas had to be sold as much as they were discovered. Philosophy wasn't just a solitary pursuit, it was a public performance. Imagine trying to convince a skeptical audience that humans might have once been fish. That's the kind of intellectual high-wire act Anaximander was performing without a safety net. Despite the hurdles, his ideas survived, passed down through the generations. The fact that we're still talking about him today is a testament to the enduring power of his theories. Anaximander was a man who dared to dream beyond the confines of his time, and in doing so he laid the groundwork for a legacy that would ripple through the ages. As we wrap up this exploration of his biological musings, keep in mind that Anaximander's work was just the beginning. His theories were seeds planted in the fertile soil of ancient Greek thought, seeds that would eventually grow into the towering trees of modern science. So, as we ponder the origins of life and our place in the cosmos, let's tip our hats to Anaximander, the ancient thinker who dared to ask the big questions, even if he didn't have all the answers. And remember, his story isn't over yet. There's still more to uncover about this trailblazing philosopher and his impact on the world. Stay tuned for the next chapter in the saga of Anaximander, where we'll delve even deeper into the mysteries of the cosmos. As we sail further into the legacy of Anaximander, it's time to see how his trailblazing ideas didn't just evaporate into the Aegean breeze. Instead, they sparked a chain reaction, influencing some of the brightest minds that Greek philosophy had to offer. Enter Pythagoras and Anaximenes, two philosophers who, like a pair of intellectual magpies, picked up the shiny bits of Anaximander's theories and made them their own. First, let's chat about Pythagoras, the guy we all begrudgingly remember for that math theorem that haunted our high school years. But Pythagoras was more than just triangles and hypotenuses. He was a thinker who found inspiration in Anaximander's cosmic musings. Anaximander's notion of the earth as a free-floating entity must have struck a chord with Pythagoras, who would later propose that harmony and order were the universe's guiding principles. It's like Anaximander handed Pythagoras the sheet music, and Pythagoras composed the symphony. Of course, Pythagoras took things a step further, wrapping his ideas in numbers and mysticism, envisioning a cosmos where math was the ultimate truth. Then there's Anaximenes, Anaximander's student and philosophical protege. If Anaximander was all about the boundless apeiron, Anaximenes took a slightly different tack, suggesting that air Not some mysterious cosmic soup, was the fundamental substance of the universe. It's like Anaximenes was standing on Anaximander's shoulders, peering into the cosmos and saying, "Hey, I see what you're doing, but let's bring it back to something a bit more, shall we say, breathable?" Anaximenes' work was a sort of remix of Anaximander's greatest hits, grounded in the tangible, yet still reaching for the stars. The ripples of Anaximander's influence didn't stop there. His ideas laid the groundwork for a seismic shift in Western thought, a pivot from mythological narratives to rational explanations. In a world where everything from thunderstorms to hiccups was attributed to the whims of gods, Anaximander dared to ask, what if there's more to it than that? This was no small feat in a culture steeped in tales of divine intervention. Yet, Anaximander's vision of a universe governed by natural laws was a catalyst for a broader intellectual awakening, encouraging thinkers to seek explanations in the observable world rather than the capricious moods of deities with too much time on their hands. Economically speaking, the shift towards rational explanations wasn't just an academic exercise, it was practical. As trade routes expanded and cities like Miletus thrived, understanding the natural world became crucial. Predicting weather patterns, reading the stars for navigation, and managing resources weren't just scholarly pursuits, they were the lifeblood of commerce and survival. Anaximander's ideas, though abstract, hinted at a universe that could be understood and, perhaps, harnessed. This was a boon for a society that was increasingly reliant on knowledge to fuel its economic engine. But let's not get swept away by the romance of intellectual progression without acknowledging the grit beneath the glamour. Questioning established narratives required more than just a curious mind, it demanded courage. Imagine standing in an agora, surrounded by skeptics and traditionalists, proclaiming that the earth wasn't perched on the back of a giant turtle. It's the ancient Greek equivalent of suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the world doesn't revolve around us. This wasn't just philosophy, it was a radical reimagining of humanity's place in the cosmos. And yet, here we are, centuries later, still grappling with the same questions Anaximander pondered under the Milesian sun. His legacy is a testament to the power of questioning, of daring to look beyond the accepted norms and ask, what if? It's a reminder that progress often begins with a single, audacious thought, a willingness to step off the edge of the known world and into the uncharted waters of possibility. Anaximander's story is one of both romance and reality. It's the tale of a thinker who dared to dream big in a time when the world was small, who saw the cosmos not as a collection of myths but as a vast, interconnected system waiting to be understood. He was a pioneer of reason in an age of superstition, a visionary who glimpsed a universe where the earth floated freely, unbound by the chains of myth. And while he may not have had all the answers, his willingness to ask the questions set the stage for the great thinkers who followed. So, as we wrap up our journey through Anaximander's world, let's remember that his legacy isn't just about maps or biological musings, it's about the courage to question, to imagine, and to explore. In a world that often prefers comfort over challenge, Anaximander's spirit is a beacon, urging us to cast aside the myths that bind us and embrace the boundless possibilities of the unknown. In the grand tapestry of history, Anaximander is a thread that weaves through time, connecting us to the ancient past and reminding us that the pursuit of knowledge is as infinite as the cosmos he once imagined. In the days when the Parthenon gleamed like a freshly polished smartphone screen and Socrates was the OG influencer, Athens was the buzzing hub of intellectual thought. You couldn't toss a pebble in the agora without hitting a philosopher, each ready to spar with words sharper than a Spartan spear. Forget Facebook debates, these guys were the masters of the ancient subtweet, crafting arguments that would make modern Twitter threads look like post-it notes. Athens, circa 5th century BCE, was the birthplace of more than just democracy and feta cheese. It was a crucible of ideas where every street corner hosted a pop-up debate club. Philosophers were the rock stars of the day, strutting around in their tunics like they were on the red carpet at the Met Gala. But instead of designer shoes, they sported sandals and carried scrolls brimming with wisdom, or at least what passed for wisdom back then. At the heart of this intellectual mosh pit were the three major schools of thought, the Academy, the Lyceum, and the Garden. Picture them as the Harvard, Yale, and, well, maybe the liberal arts college of the ancient world. Each had its own style, its own vibe, and its own way of answering the big questions, like, what is truth? Or, why does my toga keep slipping off my shoulder? First off, let's stroll over to the Academy. Founded by Plato around 387 BCE, it was basically the varsity team of philosophy schools. Plato set it up in a grove dedicated to Academus, some guy whose claim to fame was having a lovely chunk of land named after him. The Academy wasn't just a school, it was an intellectual boot camp. Students here didn't just sit around doodling on wax tablets, they engaged in rigorous debate, dissecting ideas with the precision of a surgeon. Think of it as a TED Talk on steroids, where the Q&A session could last for weeks. Not to be outdone, Aristotle, Plato's star pupil, broke away and started his own thing, the Lyceum. If Plato's Academy was the cool, collected elder sibling, Aristotle's Lyceum was the rebellious teenager. It was founded in 335 BCE and was less about lofty ideals and more about practicality. Aristotle was the kind of guy who'd roll up his sleeves and get his hands dirty with empirical research. His students didn't just philosophize, they catalogued plants, dissected animals, and basically invented science as we know it. The Lyceum was like the innovative tech startup of its day, always pushing boundaries and breaking the mold. Meanwhile, over in a quiet corner of Athens, Epicurus was setting up the garden around 36 BCE. Now, the garden wasn't about heavy intellectual lifting or dissecting frogs, it was more like the chill hangout spot. Epicurus believed in the simple pleasures of life, like a good meal, a fine conversation, and not getting too caught up in existential dread. His school was about achieving tranquility, or ataraxia, and avoiding pain, sort of like the ancient version of a wellness retreat, but with more olives and less yoga. These schools weren't just about ideas, they were social networks long before Zuckerberg was a glint in Silicon Valley's eye. Philosophers would gather, debate, and occasionally throw shade at each other in the form of dense philosophical texts. If someone had a particularly spicy take, it could spread like wildfire through Athens faster than a cat video on YouTube. Going viral in ancient Athens meant your ideas would be discussed in the agora, dissected in symposiums, and maybe even earn you a bust in the local sculptor's shop. But let's not get too romantic about it. The reality was that being a philosopher was not all toga parties and intellectual banter. It often meant living a life akin to a starving artist, scraping by on the goodwill of wealthy patrons or the occasional teaching gig. The philosophers of Athens weren't just battling each other's ideas, they were battling for survival in a world where food was a daily concern and olive oil was currency. Yet, despite the hardships, these thinkers laid the groundwork for Western philosophy, science, and even politics. Their debates and ideas continue to echo through the ages, shaping our understanding of the world. So next time you see a heated debate online, remember, the philosophical schools of ancient Athens did it first, and they did it with a lot more style and sandals. So, where were we? Ah yes, the philosophers of ancient Athens, those daring intellectuals, clinging to their sandals like they were the latest limited edition sneakers. Among them, none stood taller or more abstract than Plato, who founded the Academy around 387 BCE. Let's dive into this cerebral wonderland, where logic was served with a side of lunch and ideas were chewed over like fine Athenian olives. The Academy, nestled in a grove named after the semi-legendary hero Academus, wasn't just a school, it was a mind-bending institution where students were as likely to engage in intense dialectical training as they were to partake in a good meal. Plato understood that a hungry philosopher is a distracted one, so lunch wasn't just a social break, it was a strategic part of education. Picture this. Students gathered under the shady trees, debating the nature of reality over what was probably ancient Greece's version of a charcuterie board. Now, let's debunk a pervasive myth, the idea of the philosopher's noble poverty. Sure, it sounds romantic, men of thought sacrificing worldly pleasures for intellectual enlightenment, but, spoiler alert, running the academy cost a pretty drachma. Maintaining a steady flow of scrolls, wax tablets, and imported wine for those philosophical symposia wasn't cheap. The reality was that Plato needed funding, and lots of it. He relied on wealthy patrons and students who could afford the tuition, a practice not too different from today's ivy-covered institutions. In fact, the annual cost to keep the academy running could easily reach several hundred drachmas, quite a sum when you consider that a skilled Athenian worker might earn just 1 drachma a day. Plato's teachings were as dense as a block of marble and as abstract as a modern artist's sketch. He loved nothing more than to dive into the realm of forms, those perfect, unchanging concepts that exist beyond our sensory world. It's as if Plato was a time traveler giving a TED talk on the metaverse, obsessed with a higher, digital reality that's only accessible to the enlightened few. His dialogues often wandered through these metaphysical landscapes, leading students on intellectual journeys that made the Odyssey look like a short stroll to the Agora. And yet, despite the heady nature of his teachings, Plato's academy was buzzing with activity. Students and scholars debated, theorized, and occasionally philosophized themselves into a mental knot. The place had more intellectual energy than a modern-day hackathon, with Plato as the ultimate keynote speaker, always ready to challenge assumptions and push boundaries. The academy wasn't just about esoteric musings, though. It also served as a breeding ground for political thought. Plato's dialogues often touched on governance and society, paving the way for students to ponder the big questions of their day. Who gets to rule? What is justice? Why does my toga keep slipping off my shoulder during serious debates? These were the issues that kept the academy buzzing, contributing to the development of political theory that would echo through the centuries. Yet, for all its intellectual heft, the academy wasn't immune to the whims of fate and politics. It faced its fair share of challenges, from financial woes to political tensions that occasionally threatened its very existence. But through it all, it remained a beacon of learning and a testament to Plato's vision, a place where the curious could gather, debate, and dream of worlds beyond the visible. As we ponder the legacy of Plato and his intellectual playground, it's clear that the academy was more than just a school. It was a testament to the power of ideas, a reminder that even in a world of constant change and uncertainty, the pursuit of knowledge remains a noble endeavor. And while Plato might have been more comfortable discussing the ethereal than the everyday, his vision laid the groundwork for future generations to explore the mysteries of the universe, be it in an ancient grove or the digital metaverse of today. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The story of philosophical Athens is far from over, and as we continue our deep dive into these storied schools, remember, every great thought begins with a single, well-chewed olive. Stay tuned for more intellectual escapades as we explore the rest of this ancient intellectual landscape. As we dust off our sandals and move from Plato's ethereal academy, the intellectual scene in Athens gets a shake-up courtesy of Aristotle, the original data geek. In 3035 BCE, Aristotle opened the Lyceum, a place where thinking took a sharp turn from Plato's dreamy forms to the nitty-gritty of the empirical world. If Plato was the philosopher king of metaphysical musings, Aristotle was the science nerd who catalogued everything from aardvarks to ziggurats. If either existed in Greece, that is. The Lyceum wasn't your typical school. Think of it as the WeWork of the ancient world, but instead of overpriced lattes, you got an endless supply of scrolls and a chance to witness Aristotle in action. Aristotle didn't just teach. He engaged in what can only be described as history's first TED Talk marathon. The Lyceum was less about structured classes and more about an intellectual free-for-all, where students and scholars mingled in a kind of scholarly co-working space. Here, Aristotle dissected ideas with the precision of a surgeon and sometimes actual animals with similar precision. Forget Plato's world of ideals. Aristotle was all about the observable universe. Aristotle's obsession with categorizing everything under the sun makes today's big data enthusiasts look like they're playing with alphabet blocks. He systematically analyzed politics, ethics, biology, and just about everything else, creating frameworks that still underpin modern thought. Imagine him in today's world. He'd probably be drowning in spreadsheets, color-coded and meticulously organized. It's no wonder he laid the groundwork for disciplines ranging from biology to political science. If there was a Nobel Prize for intellectual multitasking, Aristotle would have been the inaugural winner. Myth-busting time. Aristotle wasn't the lone genius laboring away in solitude like some romantic narratives might suggest. No, he was more of an intellectual hub in human form, drawing thinkers from all over Greece. The Lyceum was buzzing, not just with chatter, but with the scratching of quills on parchment. It was a hive of activity, where the air was thick with the smell of ink and ideas. This was intellectual networking before LinkedIn was a thing, where philosophers rubbed shoulders with scientists, poets with politicians. It was a melting pot of brilliance, all under the watchful eye of Aristotle, who was probably more of a mentor than a traditional teacher. Now, let's talk economics, because, believe it or not, being a philosopher wasn't all about pondering the meaning of life while living off the land. Just like any modern educational institution, the Lyceum needed funding. Aristotle wasn't above courting wealthy patrons to keep the lights on, or the oil lamps burning, as it were. The Lyceum's operational costs, from maintaining its library to feeding its scholars, would have been substantial. In a world where a drachma was the daily wage of a skilled worker, running a philosophical factory was no small feat. The Lyceum's impact wasn't confined to the boundaries of Athens. Aristotle's approach of empirical observation and categorization laid the foundation for modern scientific inquiry. He was the guy who first said, "Hey, maybe we should test our theories against reality," a radical notion in a time when most folks were happy to speculate wildly. While others pondered abstract ideals, Aristotle was busy dissecting squids and studying the stars. His work in biology alone was groundbreaking. He identified hundreds of species, categorizing them in a way that would make even Linnaeus tip his laurel wreath. But don't let the scientific glamour fool you. Aristotle wasn't immune to the quirks and limitations of his time. Some of his theories were, shall we say, a bit off the mark, like his insistence that heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, a theory that Galileo would later debunk with a couple of musket balls and a leaning tower. Yet, despite the occasional misstep, Aristotle's legacy as a pioneering thinker is undeniable. His Lyceum was the epicenter of a seismic shift in human thought, one that ripples through to the present day, influencing everything from the scientific method to the way we analyze political systems. As for Aristotle himself, he was a man of many hats, philosopher, scientist, teacher, and even a tutor to Alexander the Great. Talk about a resume. His influence stretched beyond the walls of the Lyceum and into the corridors of power, shaping not just academic thought, but also the policies of empires. It's no exaggeration to say that Aristotle's intellectual pursuits laid the groundwork for the modern world. In the bustling agora of ideas that was Athens, Aristotle's Lyceum stood out as a beacon of empirical inquiry and systematic thought. It was a place where ideas weren't just dreamed up, they were tested, observed, and catalogued. This methodical approach to understanding the world was revolutionary, setting the stage for future generations to build upon. Aristotle's legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come not from the heavens, but from the world right in front of us. So, as we leave Aristotle and his merry band of scholars, remember, the Lyceum wasn't just a school, it was a launch pad for ideas that would eventually shape the course of history. And while Aristotle might not have had a smartphone or a data analytics team, his quest to categorize everything still resonates in our modern obsession with data. Stay tuned as we continue our journey through ancient Athens, where each philosopher's story is as rich and layered as a well-baked spanakopita. As we step away from Aristotle's bustling Lyceum, where the air is thick with the scent of ink and scholarly ambition, we find ourselves in a different corner of Athens, a place that feels less like a classroom and more like a cozy living room. Welcome to the Garden of Epicurus, established in 37 BCE, where the philosophy is served with a side of relaxation and a dash of good company. If the academy was a cerebral marathon and the Lyceum an intellectual buffet, the garden was the ancient world's equivalent of a mindfulness retreat. Minus the incense and uncomfortable yoga mats, Epicurus, the man of the hour, is often miscast as the ancient poster child for hedonism. But let's clear up that olive oil spill right away. While Epicurus did preach the pursuit of pleasure, he wasn't advocating for a non-stop toga party with Dionysian overtones. Instead, he was all about the simple joys, a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a chat with friends. Think of him as the original minimalist, preaching a philosophy that was about as far from excess as you could get. Forget the lavish banquets, Epicurus was more into picnics with a side of philosophical musings. The garden, therefore, wasn't just a place to wax poetic about the meaning of life. It was a sanctuary from the chaos of the city, a place to cultivate personal well-being and friendship. Epicurus believed that the key to happiness was ataraxia, a state of serene calmness, achievable through moderation. In a world where political upheaval was as common as a drachma, This approach was as revolutionary as it was appealing. Epicurus's teachings might sound like they're ripped from the pages of a modern self-help book, but there's a reason they have stood the test of time. He advocated for the kind of pleasure that doesn't come with a hangover or a hefty credit card bill, a far cry from the Instagram-worthy lifestyles peddled by today's influencers. His mantra was simple: reduce desires, minimize pain, and surround yourself with a few good friends. The garden wasn't just a philosophical school, it was a lifestyle choice, one that rejected the highbrow intellectualism of its contemporaries in favor of a more grounded, accessible approach. Now, let's talk economics because, believe it or not, maintaining a philosophical community didn't come cheap. While Epicurus wasn't running a luxury resort, the garden still required funds to keep the olive trees pruned and the philosophy flowing. Like his counterparts, Epicurus relied on the generosity of patrons and the occasional well-heeled student. Operating on a shoestring budget meant the garden was a place of modest means, but that was part of its charm. After all, when your philosophy is all about appreciating the little things, the lack of opulence becomes a feature, not a bug. Epicurus's emphasis on friendship was more than just a philosophical footnote, it was central to his teachings. In an era where alliances could shift as quickly as the Athenian winds, the garden offered a stable community built on mutual support. Friendship, Epicurus argued, was one of the greatest sources of happiness, and it didn't hurt that a trusted friend might also help cover the cost of dinner. This emphasis on personal connection was a direct challenge to the more solitary pursuits of other philosophical schools, where introspection sometimes took precedence over interaction. And let's not forget the myth-busting. The caricature of Epicureanism as a free-for-all of indulgence is as misleading as a snake oil salesman's pitch. Epicurus wasn't advocating for a life of excess, he was encouraging a life of balance. In fact, he warned against overindulgence, arguing that the pursuit of luxury often leads to more pain than pleasure. In this way, Epicurus was the ancient world's answer to Marie Kondo, helping people declutter their desires and find joy in simplicity. The garden's appeal lay in its practicality. While other schools were busy dissecting the nature of reality or cataloguing the cosmos, Epicurus was focused on how to live well in the here and now. His teachings resonated with those who found the metaphysical musings of Plato and Aristotle a bit too abstract for their taste. Epicurus offered a philosophy that was both accessible and actionable. No need for a PhD in metaphysics to get the gist. In a city as intellectually charged as Athens, where every street corner was a potential debate platform, the garden stood out for its straightforward approach. It wasn't about escaping reality, but embracing it with a sense of calm and clarity. Epicurus's teachings were like a breath of fresh Athenian air, offering an antidote to the high-stakes intellectual sparring that characterized much of the city's philosophical life. As we wander through the garden, it's clear that Epicurus wasn't just planting seeds of wisdom, he was cultivating a community built on resilience and joy. His legacy is a testament to the power of simplicity in a complex world, a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come not from grand theories, but from the everyday moments that make life worth living. So, as we leave the garden behind, let's carry a bit of its tranquility with us. Epicurus's philosophy may have been misunderstood over the centuries, but its core message remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Athens. In a world that often feels overwhelming, the garden offers a blueprint for finding peace amidst the chaos. And as we move forward in our journey through the philosophical landscape of ancient Greece, remember, sometimes the greatest wisdom is found not in the stars, but in the simple act of sharing a meal with friends. And as we saunter away from the serene sanctuary of Epicurus's garden, let's take a moment to reflect on the ideas that sprouted in these iconic schools and how they've been the intellectual fertilizer for Western thought ever since. Picture the Renaissance, that glorious European reboot around the 14th century, where thinkers dusted off these ancient scrolls like they were uncovering a long-lost Spotify playlist. The Renaissance humanists, with their newfound zest for all things classical, were basically the fanboys of Plato and Aristotle. They devoured their works and transformed them into the intellectual bedrock of their age, much like how we can't get enough of nostalgic reboots today. Aristotle's systematic ways and Plato's idealism became the twin pillars upon which Renaissance scholars built their lofty cathedrals of knowledge. They took these ancient musings and ran with them, setting the stage for everything from Copernicus's heliocentric model to Shakespeare's existential musings. It was like a philosophical relay race, where the baton of wisdom was passed down through the centuries, each runner adding their twist to the tale. And speaking of twists, the Renaissance was the time when these ideas really got their groove back, shaking off the medieval dust and strutting their stuff on Europe's intellectual catwalk. But let's not romanticize too much. The legacy of these schools isn't just about their high-minded ideals. It's also about the nitty-gritty of real-world application, or sometimes the lack thereof. Plato's Republic, for instance, is a fascinating read, but his notion of philosopher kings ruling the masses is about as practical as a chocolate teapot. Yet this didn't stop countless thinkers from pondering how such a society might work. Meanwhile, Aristotle's empirical methods laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution, proving that sometimes the devil is in the details, or in this case, the data. Fast forward to today, and you'll find echoes of these ancient debates in places as ubiquitous as your local coffee shop. Swap the togas for skinny jeans and the agora for a cafe, and you've got yourself a scene that wouldn't look out of place in Athens circa 400 BCE. People are still arguing about the nature of truth, the essence of justice, and whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It's comforting, in a way, knowing that while our hairstyles may have changed, our penchant for philosophical sparring has not. These ancient schools of thought even have their fingerprints all over modern philosophy podcasts. Ever notice how your favorite podcast hosts love to dive into deep existential waters, armed with little more than a microphone and a penchant for debate? They're the digital descendants of those Athenian philosophers, bringing the dialectical drama to our earbuds. It's like Socrates' method of questioning got a 21st century upgrade, now with more emojis and less hemlock. And let's not forget the economic realities that these philosophers faced. The financial juggling act that kept these schools afloat back then echoes in today's education system, where funding remains a precarious balancing act. In both cases, the pursuit of knowledge often comes with a hefty price tag, proving that, while wisdom might be priceless, running a school is anything but. So, what's the takeaway from all this philosophical pontification? Perhaps it's that human nature, with all its quirks and contradictions, remains remarkably consistent across the ages. Whether in ancient Athens or modern Manhattan, people are still grappling with the same fundamental questions, trying to make sense of a world that's as complex as it is fascinating. In wrapping up, we'd be remiss not to include a nugget of wisdom from the original sages themselves. Epicurus once said, "Not what we have, but what we enjoy, constitutes our abundance." It's a sentiment that rings as true today as it did back in the olive groves of his garden, highlighting that the pursuit of happiness, in all its simplicity, remains a timeless endeavor. So, whether you're sipping an oat milk latte or poring over a dusty tome, remember that the quest for understanding is a journey, not a destination. As we close the book on our exploration of ancient Athens and its philosophical luminaries, let's carry forward the spirit of inquiry and debate that they championed. After all, while the sandals and scrolls may have been swapped for sneakers and smartphones, the essence of their teachings endures, reminding us that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Sweat beads on your brow as you stand amidst the cacophony of a bustling marketplace in 7th century BC. Lydia. The air is thick with the scent of spices. A symphony of clinking metal and haggling voices surrounds you, and you're right in the thick of it, clutching a handful of electrum coins that are about to change the game. Welcome to the world of the Lydian merchant, where the economy isn't just a backdrop, it's a living, breathing beast that you have to tame if you want to make it big. First off, let's talk about these coins in your hand. They're not just any coins. They're the rock stars of ancient currency, making their debut under the reign of King Alyattes. We're talking about the first standardized currency in the world, minted from electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. Each coin is stamped with the royal seal, a lion. And let's be honest, who doesn't want a pocket full of lions? It's a power move that screams, "I'm here to do business." Now, why does this matter? Well, before these shiny little discs, trading was a pain. Bartering meant haggling over the value of goats versus bolts of cloth. And let's face it, nobody wants to do that math at the crack of dawn. Coins simplified trade, created a standard value, and were much easier to carry across the rugged terrains of Asia Minor than a herd of livestock. Not to mention, they didn't poop everywhere. Your day starts early, because Lydia's economy doesn't sleep, and neither can you if you want to make a profit. The goods in your inventory vary. Perhaps it's a shipment of fine textiles, or maybe you're dealing in saffron, the gold of spices. Each item has its place in the bustling trade networks that stretch from the Aegean coast to the depths of Anatolia. Your task? To ensure these goods make it across treacherous lands and into the hands of eager buyers. But let's not romanticize this. The life of a merchant is no stroll down the marble paths of luxury villas. It's more like a grueling trek across rocky roads where bandits see you as a walking treasure chest. You need to be savvy, with a mind as sharp as the daggers you carry for protection. Logistics is your best friend and greatest headache. Moving goods across the Lydian landscape means dealing with unpredictable weather, the threat of thieves, and the constant negotiation of tariffs and taxes at every city-state border. You get to know which local officials are open to persuasion, and which ones should be avoided like a bad case of the plague. And then there's the marketplace itself, a chaotic dance of supply and demand. As a Lydian merchant, you've got to keep an eye on the competition. The guy next to you is selling pottery that looks suspiciously like the batch you brought in last week. Meanwhile, a rival from across the Aegean is offering olive oil at cutthroat prices. It's a jungle out there, and survival means adapting quickly. You learn to read the room and the economy better than any politician. Speaking of which, the political climate is as volatile as your profit margins. King Alyattes is a savvy ruler, expanding his territory and influence, turning Lydia into a powerhouse of trade. But his ambitions mean taxes, and taxes mean less coin in your pouch. You've got to weigh the cost of doing business against the benefits of a stable, albeit aggressive, government. But hey, at least it's not as chaotic as those city-states over in Greece, where every other day someone's overthrowing a tyrant or declaring a new democracy. Despite all this, there's something exhilarating about being in the thick of it. The economy is not just a collection of numbers. It's a living narrative, one that you help write with every deal you make and every coin you spend. You might even say that the real wealth of Lydia isn't in its electrum coins or its fertile lands, but in the trade networks that you, dear merchant, help to weave across the ancient world. So, keep your wits about you, your dagger sharp, and those electrum coins jingling in your pouch. It's not just business. It's history in the making, one transaction at a time. So, here you are, weaving through the vibrant chaos of Sardis, the heart of Lydia, where the marketplace is less a place and more a full-blown sensory assault. It's a kaleidoscope of colours, sounds, and smells, a living testament to the art of commerce. Your senses are on high alert, like a hawk circling for prey. You've got a keen eye for textiles, and your gut tells you which batch of peppercorns is worth its weight in those precious electrum coins. Let's talk haggling, a skill as essential as breathing. You're not just exchanging goods, you're engaging in a battle of wits. You know the stakes. A misstep could mean the difference between profit and eating stale bread for dinner. The key to success isn't just about knowing your products, it's about reading the room. You spot a buyer eyeing your saffron with a gleam in their eye, a sign of interest. Time to pounce. You start high and they go low, a dance as old as time. A little bluff, a little charm, and voila, you've struck a deal that keeps your purse happy. But it's not all about the goods. The marketplace is a crossroads of culture, a place where ideas, languages, and innovations collide. You pick up a few Greek phrases here, a dash of Persian there, enough to charm or bluff your way through most transactions. These linguistic snippets are your tools of trade, just as vital as the coins in your hand. And let's face it, knowing a few choice words in a foreign tongue can also prove handy when hurling insults or dodging them. Beyond the bustling stalls is a web of trade routes that stretch out like the spokes of a wheel, threading through mountains and across seas. The Royal Road, a marvel of its time, connects you to distant lands. Despite its grandiose name, it's more of a dusty, uneven track than a smooth highway. Still, it's your lifeline to the riches of other realms. From the Aegean to the depths of Anatolia, you're part of a network that's as much about survival as it is about prosperity. But let's not sugarcoat it. These routes are fraught with risks. Bandits lurk in the shadows, ready to relieve you of your hard-earned goods, not to mention the constant tolls demanded by local lords. You've got to be part merchant, part diplomat, and part warrior. Negotiating your way through these territories means understanding the political chess game played by rulers like King Alyattes. His alliances and rivalries shape the landscape of trade as surely as any river or mountain. Speaking of politics, the world of alliances and betrayals is as volatile as the markets themselves. Lydia's position as a trade powerhouse is both a boon and a bane. Sure, alliances open up new opportunities, but they also invite threats. Neighbouring powers, whether allies or adversaries, keep you on your toes. One day you're trading peaceably with a Greek city-state. The next, you're navigating the fallout of a skirmish that's disrupted your supply chain. But hey, nobody said being a merchant in ancient Lydia would be boring. And then there are the cultural exchanges, the real gems of this bustling marketplace. Ideas and innovations flow as freely as the goods themselves. You hear whispers of new philosophical musings from Greece, tales of mystical lands from the East, and perhaps even a hint of a new musical style that makes your feet tap to an unfamiliar rhythm. These exchanges enrich your life in ways that coins alone cannot measure. As you wrap up another day in the marketplace, weary but content, you reflect on your role in this grand tapestry. You're not just a cog in the machine, you're a vital thread, weaving connections that span empires and epochs. You see yourself not as a mere trader, but as a custodian of culture, a bearer of stories, and an architect of alliances. Looking around, you realize the marketplace is a microcosm of the world, an arena where humanity's best and worst traits are on full display. The hustle and bustle, the deals struck and broken, the mingling of cultures, all of it tells a story as old as civilization itself. And as you pocket your hard-earned coins, you can't help but smile. Because in the end, being a Lydian merchant isn't just about making a living, it's about living a story worth telling. And speaking of living stories, let's dive into the cast of characters you rub shoulders with in this ancient bazaar. You're not the only one with a bag of tricks and a sharp tongue. Meet your fellow traders, the Greeks with their olive oils and wines, the Phrygians carrying woolen textiles, and the Assyrians with their wares so exotic they might as well come with a side of mystery. It's a veritable League of Nations, minus the bureaucracy and plus a lot more yelling. Now, let's clear up a common misconception. These characters aren't just extras in your commercial epic, they're key players. Despite what some might fantasize, you're not a lone wolf carving out an empire single-handedly. No, you're part of a bustling network, a web of alliances and rivalries that could make Game of Thrones look like a children's play. Sure, you might share a laugh over a shared bottle of Greek wine one day, and the next you're in a heated feud over who gets to supply Sardis with the finest saffron. It's business with a side of drama, and who doesn't love a little drama? Forming alliances isn't just smart, it's survival. Team up with a savvy Greek or a wily Assyrian, and suddenly you've got more muscle against those pesky bandits or leverage in negotiations. It's all about who you know and how well you can work together, even if it's reluctantly. The key is finding that sweet spot where competition turns into cooperation, and enemies become allies, at least until the next big market shift. As for those Phrygians, don't be fooled by their woolly demeanour. They're a crafty bunch, and their textiles fetch a pretty penny. You might find yourself at odds with them over trade routes or market territories, but when the chips are down, they can be just the allies you need to fend off a mutual threat. The politics of trade are as complex as any royal court, and you've got a front-row seat to the intrigue. And then there's the role of the Lydian middle class, the unsung heroes of this economic saga. While the kings and nobles might get all the glory, it's the merchants and craftsmen like you who really keep the wheels turning. You're the glue that holds this society together, the bridge between the rulers and the ruled. Your trade routes and connections don't just benefit your wallet, they bolster Lydia's standing on the world stage. It's a heavy mantle to bear, but hey, someone's got to do it. Speaking of mantles, let's debunk the myth of the lavish lifestyles of Lydian merchants. Sure, you might picture yourself lounging in a marble villa, sipping wine as endless riches pour in, but the reality is a bit less glamorous. Sure, you can afford a decent meal, and maybe even a few luxuries now and then, but most of your earnings are reinvested back into your trade. Your house is more likely to be a modest abode rather than a sprawling estate, and you're more familiar with long, hard days than with leisurely afternoons. Now, let's talk numbers. The distances you cover aren't trivial. Trading routes stretch hundreds of miles across rugged terrain, and travelling them isn't a weekend getaway. You're slogging through the dust and mud for weeks, maybe months, depending on the season and your destination. And let's not even get started on the costs, tolls, bribes, tariffs. Everyone wants a piece of your pie. It's practically a miracle if you make it back with a profit after all the hands that dip into your earnings. And yet, despite the hardships, there's something undeniably exhilarating about the trade. You're not just moving goods, you're a conduit for culture, a bearer of ideas that ripple out and shape societies. The impact of your trade reaches far beyond the marketplace, influencing politics and power dynamics across regions. Lydia's wealth and influence grow not just from its resources, but from the networks you help build and sustain. So next time someone waxes poetic about the opulence of Lydian merchants, set them straight. You're not gilded aristocracy, you're a gritty entrepreneur, a pioneer in a world where commerce and culture collide. It's not gold and glory that drive you, but the thrill of the trade, the challenge of the deal. And as you navigate this ancient world with its ever-shifting alliances and unpredictable markets, remember that you're not just a player in a story, you're one of its most crucial authors. In conclusion, as you retire for the evening, weary from the day's hustle and bustle, take a moment to reflect on your place in this grand narrative. You're not just a trader, but a linchpin in the economic and cultural tapestry of your time. Each deal, each handshake, each hard-won alliance is a testament to your skill and determination in a world that's as ruthless as it is fascinating. So keep your eyes sharp, your wits sharper, and your heart open to the endless possibilities that tomorrow's market will bring. Because in Lydia, history isn't just something you read, it's something you live. As you settle into your modest abode, let's take a detour from the trade routes and market stalls to explore what life looks like when the electrum coins stop jingling for the day. Welcome to the social world of a 7th century BC, Lydian merchant, equal parts family drama, cultural exchange, and the occasional divine intervention. Spoiler alert, it's not all banquets and laurel wreaths. First, let's tackle the family dynamics. In Lydia, much like everywhere else, family ties are both your safety net and the source of your most profound headaches. Think of your household as a small business within your larger trading empire. Everyone has a role to play. You're not just a merchant, you're a patriarch, a role that comes with its own set of expectations and pressures. The stakes? Nothing less than your legacy. Marriage in Lydia is less about romance and more about strategy. It's like a business merger, except instead of stock options, you're trading goats and textiles. These alliances could be the key to expanding your trade network. A well-placed marriage could open up new trade routes or secure you that hard-to-get audience with a fickle local governor. And while you might not be whispering sweet nothings, you're definitely whispering sweet deals. Women in Lydia aren't just passive participants in these arrangements. Far from it. They play a crucial role in the family business, often managing domestic affairs and, sometimes, the accounts. These women are the unsung CFOs of your operation, ensuring that the household runs as smoothly as your trade routes. In fact, some women engage directly in trade themselves, a reality that might surprise those who picture the ancient world as purely male-dominated. Now, on to the cultural practices that color your life and your business prospects. Religion in Lydia is more than just a Sunday affair. It's woven into the very fabric of daily life. The gods are everywhere, from the bustling markets to the quiet corners of your home. Whether it's Artemis, the revered huntress, or the powerful Zeus himself, these deities are as much a part of your trade negotiations as the goods you're selling. You might find yourself making offerings at the local temple, seeking divine favor for a successful journey, or trying to ward off a particularly bad streak of luck. Speaking of luck, let's not forget the rituals. There's a whole spectrum of them, from the public spectacles of grand festivals to the more intimate household ceremonies. You might sacrifice a goat before a long journey, hoping for safe passage and favorable trade winds. Or perhaps you'll attend a festival in Sardis, where the air is alive with music, dance, and the scent of roasting meat. These events aren't just about honoring the gods, they're networking opportunities, a chance to rub shoulders or jugs of wine with fellow merchants and potential partners. When you're not busy invoking divine favor or negotiating trade deals, downtime in Lydia offers its own set of delights. Forget the image of a solitary merchant counting coins in a dark corner. Life here is social, vibrant, and, dare I say, a touch extravagant. Banquets are the social glue, where the wine flows as freely as the stories. Picture a room filled with the clatter of dishes, the laughter of friends, and the occasional heated debate over who supplies the best olive oil. These gatherings are where alliances are formed, disputes are settled, and tales of distant lands are swapped like treasure. And then there are the games. Lydia is nothing if not competitive, and the thrill of the chase extends beyond the marketplace. From board games resembling an ancient precursor, to chess, to more physical pursuits like wrestling and chariot racing, these activities are not just for leisure, they're a way to test your mettle, both physically and strategically. Winning a game might not earn you coins, but it could earn you respect, and in Lydia, that's a currency all its own. Now, about those myths we've all heard, like the idea that every Lydian merchant ends the day with a goblet of wine in one hand and a lyre in the other, serenading under a starlit sky. Sure, there are nights like that, but more often than not, you're collapsing into bed with a head full of calculations and a to-do list longer than the royal road. The reality is a balancing act between aspiration and practicality, where each day is a new chapter in your ongoing saga. As we delve deeper into the life of a Lydian merchant, remember that these tales of family, ritual, and leisure are more than just historical footnotes. They're the heartbeat of your existence, the rhythm to which your daily life is set. These are the moments that shape your legacy, not just as a merchant, but as a member of a complex and interconnected society. So, keep your eyes and ears open. Tomorrow's market promises new challenges, alliances, and perhaps even a blessing or two from the gods. Your story isn't just written in coin and trade. It's etched in the very culture of Lydia itself, waiting for the next page to turn. But hold on to your lion-stamped coins, because the winds of change are about to blow through Lydia, and they're not bringing gentle breezes. No, these winds have the force of an empire behind them, the Persians, led by the formidable Cyrus the Great. Now, if you think your trade routes were dicey before, wait until the geopolitical tectonic plates start shifting. Picture this. It's around 547 BC, and Cyrus is eyeing Lydia like a kid in a candy store, and he's got a sweet tooth for conquest. Cyrus didn't just wake up one day and decide to annex Lydia over his morning porridge. No, it was all part of his grand strategy to unite the fractured city-states and create a sprawling empire. For merchants like you, this meant business, as usual, was about to become anything but. As the Persian army advanced, your trade routes, those lifelines of commerce and culture, became the front lines of a new world order. Gone were the days of haggling over saffron. Now it was about survival and adaptation. But let's not romanticize Cyrus as some kind of ancient superhero swooping in to save the day. Sure, he was innovative, and yes, he was efficient, but for Lydia it was the end of an era. The fall of Sardis, the Lydian capital, was less a climactic battle and more a calculated siege. Herodotus tells us that Croesus, the last king of Lydia, misunderstood an oracle's prediction, thinking he'd destroy a great empire. Spoiler alert, it was his own. And so, with the fall of Sardis, Lydia was absorbed into the Persian Empire, and your electrum coins lost a bit of their luster. But don't toss them just yet, because while the Lydian kingdom might have crumbled, its legacy was just getting started. Those little electrum discs, the first standardized currency, weren't just a flash in the pan. They were the blueprints for a financial revolution that would ripple across empires. The Persians, always the pragmatists, saw the genius in Lydian coinage and ran with it. Soon, coins were jangling in the pockets of merchants from the Aegean to the Indus. Talk about leaving a mark. This coinage system was a game-changer, not just for the Persians, but for every civilization that followed. It laid the groundwork for a global economy, where standardized currency replaced cumbersome barter systems. We can thank Lydia for that eureka moment when someone realized it's a lot easier to carry a sack of coins than a herd of goats. And while you might have been swept away by the tides of history, your role as a Lydian merchant was far from insignificant. You were part of a grand experiment that set the stage for modern commerce. So, what can we learn from your trials and tribulations? First, that change is the only constant. Empires rise and fall, but commerce is eternal. The lessons from Lydia echo through the ages, reminding us that adaptability is key to survival, whether you're bartering in a dusty market or trading stocks on Wall Street. The ancient world might have been brutal, but it was also brilliantly inventive. From the ashes of one kingdom rose the financial systems that continue to shape our world today. And let's not forget the human element. The Lydian merchant wasn't just a trader. You were a pioneer, a cultural ambassador, and, dare I say, an economic alchemist. You took the raw materials of your world and spun them into gold, sometimes literally. The networks you helped create weren't just about goods. They were about ideas, innovations, and the shared human experience. In a way, you were the original global citizen, long before that term was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. As we conclude this journey through the bustling lanes and dusty trails of ancient Lydia, remember that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a living narrative woven by countless individuals like you. Your story might have been set in a time of electrum coins and Persian conquests, but the themes are timeless. Trade, adaptation, and resilience are as relevant now as they were then. So next time you pull out a coin to pay for your morning coffee, spare a thought for the Lydian merchants who once clutched similar discs, pondering their next big deal. They helped set in motion a chain of events that would eventually lead to today's global economy, proving that even in the face of conquest and change, the human spirit and the pursuit of prosperity endures. Now that's a legacy worth its weight in gold, or electrum if you will. You're standing in the heart of 14th century Venice, where the morning sun glints off the Grand Canal like 1,000 tiny mirrors. The air is thick with the scent of fresh fish and the slightly less pleasant odour of Venice's less than pristine waterways. Welcome to your life as a Venetian artisan, where the romantic image of Venice as a city of endless wealth and culture is more myth than reality. But hey, who needs romance when you've got a bustling marketplace at your doorstep and a daily grind that would make modern hustle culture look like a leisurely stroll? Your day starts with a prayer, because let's face it, you need all the divine help you can get when you're trying to eke out a living in a city that's as expensive as it is beautiful. Breakfast is a simple affair. Think polenta, maybe a slice of bread if you're feeling fancy. Forget about the lavish feasts depicted in Renaissance paintings. Those are reserved for the elite. You're not munching on a croissant and sipping espresso either. It's more like gnawing on barley bread with a side of watered-down wine. The whole balanced breakfast idea isn't really a thing yet. Once fueled by your meagre meal, it's time to dive into the chaos of the Rialto market. This is Venice's beating heart, a sensory overload where merchants shout out prices and haggle like their lives depend on it. And in many ways they do. Picture a Black Friday sale, but with more shouting and fewer elbows in your ribs. The market is the place to be if you need materials for your craft, whether you're a leather worker, a glass blower, or one of the many other artisans keeping Venice alive. Navigating this maze of commerce isn't just a physical challenge, but an economic one. The cost of materials is steep, and every ducat counts. Leather, for example, might set you back about 5 ducats for a quality piece. No small sum when your daily earnings hover around 4 to 5 ducats on a good day. The reality check here is that you're not living in a postcard-perfect city of endless wealth. You're hustling in a metropolis where every coin matters. And then there are the guilds. Oh, the guilds. Think of them as the medieval version of a labour union, but with a bit more pomp and circumstance. Joining a guild is crucial if you want to make it as a craftsman. They control everything from the quality of goods to the price they're sold at, and being part of one is your ticket to respectability and protection. But let's not pretend they're altruistic organizations. Guilds are as much about maintaining power as they are about camaraderie. They keep the riffraff out, ensuring only the well-connected can play the game. But don't let the romanticized notion of Venice as a cultural utopia fool you. Sure, there's art and music if you know where to look, but there's also the gritty reality of congested canals, crowded streets, and a constant undercurrent of tension. Plagues, political intrigue, and economic disparity are as much a part of the city's DNA as its famed architecture. Venice may sell itself as a city of refinement and elegance, but the truth is, it's a place where survival is an art form in itself. Every day is a dance on the edge of chaos and creativity, where the romantic facade hides the relentless grind beneath. So as you head back to your workshop, materials in hand, remember this. Venice might be the city of dreams, but it's also a city that never lets you forget the price of those dreams, and as you prepare to face the rest of your day, just be glad you're not alone in this madhouse of commerce and culture. After all, It's the community, the camaraderie, and the shared struggle that make life in Venice not just bearable, but weirdly rewarding. And just like that, you're back at your workshop, where the real magic, or perhaps the real madness, happens. Let's dive into the heart of your workday, where the romance of Venetian artistry meets the gritty reality of hard labour. If you were expecting a serene studio filled with natural light and gentle classical music, think again. Welcome to the cramped, chaotic world of a 14th century artisan's workshop, where the air is thick with the smell of sweat, sawdust, and ambition. Now, let's talk tools and techniques. Your workbench is cluttered with an array of implements that would make a modern craftsperson's heart skip a beat. You've got your hammers, chisels, and files, nothing too exotic, but each one a vital extension of your hands. The tools are crafted from iron, and while they might be rudimentary by today's standards, in your skilled hands, they're capable of producing wonders. You see, in this era, precision isn't just about the tools, it's about the artisan's touch, honed through years of practice and a bit of trial and error. And speaking of practice, your workshop likely hums with the chatter and clatter of apprentices. These young hopefuls are the lifeblood of your trade, and while today's interns might be fetching coffee or making copies, these kids are learning the ropes by getting their hands dirty. Apprenticeships are the medieval version of an unpaid internship, but with one crucial difference: they actually teach you something useful. Over the course of about 7 years, these apprentices will learn everything from the basics of the craft to the finer points of running a business. It's a long haul, but the promise of one day becoming a master artisan is worth its weight in gold, or at least in ducats. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of Venetian opulence. Sure, Venice is the glittering jewel of the Adriatic, but your reality is a tad less glamorous. Your workshop is noisy, crowded, and let's be honest, a bit of a mess. Imagine an open-plan office, but instead of motivational posters and water coolers, you've got half-finished projects and dubious ventilation. The clamour of tools and the constant chatter make it feel more like a bustling bazaar than a serene space for creative meditation. The notion of a quiet, solitary artisan quietly crafting masterpieces? Pure fantasy. But there's a method to this madness. Venice's reputation as a trade empire means your work is in high demand. Whether you're crafting fine glassware for export, leather goods for local merchants, or metalwork fit for a noble's estate, the city's booming commerce keeps your hands and those of your apprentices busy. The political context of Venice's trade empire is a double-edged sword. It provides opportunities, but also imposes its own set of challenges. The Venetian government, with its labyrinthine bureaucracy and penchant for regulation, likes to keep a close eye on what's being produced and sold. They want quality and consistency, and they want their cut of the profits. This political oversight ensures that Venice maintains its reputation for high-quality goods, but it also means you're constantly navigating a web of rules and tariffs. It's a delicate dance, one that requires a combination of skill, savvy, and a bit of strategic bootlicking. The city's mercantile prowess is both a blessing and a curse, offering protection and prosperity on one hand, while demanding conformity and tribute on the other. As you work through the day, you can't help but marvel at the sheer ingenuity and tenacity that fuels Venice's artisans. It's a testament to the human spirit that, despite the noise, the cramped conditions, and the ever-present spectre of economic uncertainty, creativity thrives. Sure, the romantic notion of the solitary genius labouring away in perfect silence is appealing, but the reality, the messy, imperfect, chaotic reality, is far more interesting. The end of the day brings a sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that tomorrow will bring more of the same challenges and opportunities. But for now, as the sun sets and the light fades from your workshop, you take a moment to appreciate the fruits of your labour. It's not just about the end product, it's about the process, the journey, and the community of artisans who share in this daily grind. In the grand tapestry of Venice's history, it's the artisans who provide the colour and texture, weaving their own stories into the fabric of the city. And while the legends of Venetian opulence and splendour endure, it's the reality of hard work and perseverance that truly defines this city. So, as you close up shop for the night, remember, the romance of Venice might draw the crowds, but it's the grit and grind that make it what it is, and tomorrow you'll be back at it, ready to add another thread to the ever-evolving story of this remarkable city. As you close up shop for the night, let's hit pause on the grind and fast forward to the highlight of your day, the humble lunch break. Now, don't expect a Michelin-starred experience here. We're talking about the 14th century, where the concept of lunch is more about necessity than indulgence. Think of it as a medieval power, lunch minus the power suits and overpriced salads. Your typical Venetian artisan's meal is a simple affair, but it packs a punch in terms of flavour and social engagement. The star of the show? Polenta again. This cornmeal mush is the medieval equivalent of avocado toast, ubiquitous, filling, and versatile. A serving might set you back about half a ducat, a small price to pay for sustenance, even if it is a bit repetitive. If you're lucky, there might be a chunk of saltfish or a smattering of herbs thrown in for good measure. And let's not forget the watered-down wine, because hydration is key, even if your water is a little more fermented than your doctor would recommend. Lunchtime doubles as social hour, a chance to swap gossip and news with your fellow artisans. And trust me, there's plenty to talk about. Between the latest government decrees and the ever-present threat of plague, there's never a dull moment in Venice. These midday gatherings are the medieval equivalent of a Twitter feed, minus the hashtags and trolls. It's where you catch up on who got caught smuggling silk, which noble scandal is making waves, and who's rising up the ranks in the guilds. The Venetian government, in its infinite wisdom, keeps a tight grip on food prices, ensuring that basic ingredients remain affordable, or at least that's the idea. In reality, it's a bit of a juggling act. With Venice's strategic position as a trade powerhouse, the city is a melting pot of ingredients from across the known world. Spices from the east, grains from the mainland, and fish from the Adriatic all converge in this bustling marketplace of flavours. But with great variety comes great bureaucracy. The government sets limits to prevent price gouging, but navigating these regulations is like trying to catch eels with your bare hands, slippery and complicated. This blend of local and exotic ingredients gives Venice a culinary edge, yet it also comes with its own set of challenges. Picture today's farm-to-table movement. Only instead of a hipster chef, you've got a Venetian merchant trying to balance supply and demand. The city's reliance on trade means that a bad storm or a political hiccup can send prices skyrocketing faster than you can say inflation. As you nibble on your midday meal, you can't help but marvel at the culinary tapestry that Venice offers, a testament to its global connections. Sure, your diet might not have the variety of a modern-day supermarket, but there's a certain charm in the simplicity. Besides, who needs kale when you've got polenta? And let's address the myth of opulence again. The romantic image of Venice as a city where everyone feasts like a duke is, to put it mildly, a bit of a stretch. You're more likely to see artisans sharing stories over a communal pot of soup than partaking in a banquet worthy of a Renaissance painting. It's communal, it's practical, and it's a stark reminder that while Venice may be rich in culture, it's often poor in calories. But as you sit there, sipping your watered-down wine and swapping tales of trade and tribulation, there's a certain camaraderie in the air. It's the kind of moment that makes the daily grind bearable, even enjoyable. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the food on your plate, it's about the people around you, sharing in the same struggles and triumphs. So, as you finish your meal and prepare to head back to the workshop, remember this: in Venice, lunch is more than just a break from work. It's a celebration of community, a taste of the world beyond, and a brief respite from the relentless hustle of artisan life. And who knows, maybe tomorrow's lunch will bring a new piece of gossip or a fresh ingredient to spice things up. Until then, it's back to the grind, with a full stomach and a head full of stories. As you polish off that last morsel of polenta, you're ready to plunge back into the artisan fray. The afternoon stretch is where the real art of Venetian craftsmanship meets the harsh reality of supply and demand. Picture this. You're not just creating for the locals who jostle through the Rialto, but also for the international clientele who can't get enough of what Venice has to offer. It's like being the medieval version of a global startup, but with more splinters and fewer beanbag chairs. Now, let's chat about the Venetian Senate, that august body with more regulations than a modern-day tax code. These guys are the puppet masters behind Venice's mercantile machine, pulling strings and setting rules that keep the wheels of commerce turning smoothly. Or at least, that's the theory. In reality, They're as much about control and profit as they are about governance. They've got their fingers in every pie, ensuring that all trade flows through Venetian hands and pockets. The Senate's regulations are a bit like a particularly strict HOA. They're here to maintain the neighbourhood's reputation, but they also make you jump through hoops to do it. Want to ship some of your exquisite leather goods to Constantinople? Better check the latest trade edict to see if they've slapped on a new tariff or mandated a different quality standard. It's a constant game of what's the rule today? That requires more adaptability than a chameleon in a paint store. One of the crowning jewels of Venice's economy is the Arsenal, the beating heart of Venetian naval power. Think of it as the original military-industrial complex, churning out ships faster than you can say maritime dominance. It's not just a shipyard, it's a sprawling complex of workshops, forges and docks, employing thousands and producing some of the most formidable naval vessels of the age. The Arsenal is like Venice's very own Silicon Valley, a hub of innovation and production that fuels the Republic's ambitions. Inside the Arsenal, the pace is relentless. It's the medieval equivalent of a high-tech factory, but instead of robots and AI, you've got a small army of craftsmen, each one a cog in the vast machine. It's here that Venice's famous galleys are born, the sleek warships that project power across the Mediterranean like floating advertisements for Venetian engineering prowess. And the Arsenalotti, the skilled workers of the Arsenal, are the rock stars of this operation. Their work is so critical that they enjoy privileges other artisans can only dream of, like wages, job security, and even housing. But while the Arsenal is a powerhouse of productivity, it's also a microcosm of Venice's economic disparity. The Senate might sing the praises of their industrious workers, but let's not kid ourselves, the profits mainly flow upward. The rich patricians, those suave power brokers with their fingers in every pie, reap the lion's share of the spoils. Meanwhile, the artisans and labourers are left to hustle for their daily bread, literally. Let's hear it from the horse's mouth, or rather, the quill of one chronicler who noted, "The rich, their wealth is like the sea, an endless expanse. The poor, their wealth is like the sand, shifting and scarce." This pithy observation sums up the Venetian economic landscape, a glittering facade of prosperity that conceals a rocky foundation of inequality. Now, if you've ever been swept away by the romantic tales of Venetian democracy, it's time for a reality check. The Republic likes to tout its democratic ideals, but in practice, it's an oligarchy with a very thin veneer of people power. The Doge may wear the fancy hat, but the real power lies with the patricians who elect him. It's like a game of political musical chairs, but only the wealthy get to play, while the rest of the populace watches from the sidelines. The famed Council of Ten, a secretive body with more intrigue than a spy novel, calls the shots behind the scenes. They're the puppet masters of Venetian politics, ensuring that any threats to the status quo are swiftly dealt with. Think of them as the original shadow government, wielding power with a blend of fear, favoritism, and the occasional well-placed bribe. As you toil away, crafting goods that will grace the tables of merchants and nobility alike, it's hard not to feel a bit like a cog in a vast glittering machine. The romance of Venice is alive and well, but it's built on the backs of artisans like you who fuel the city's beauty with sweat and skill. The disparity between the marble-clad palazzos of the Grand Canal and the cramped quarters of the working class is stark, a reminder that the city's opulence is not for everyone. And yet, there's something undeniably captivating about this place. Despite the grinding work and the ever-present spectre of inequality, the spirit of Venice is infectious. It's a city that thrives on contradiction, where the allure of commerce meets the grit of everyday life, and where the dreams of artisans interweave with the ambitions of empires. As the afternoon progresses and the shadows lengthen, you find yourself caught in the dance of creation and commerce, a dance that has defined Venice for centuries. The city may not be the utopia of Renaissance paintings, but it's a living, breathing testament to human ingenuity and resilience. And as you look out over the bustling canals and distant islands, you can't help but feel a part of something larger. A story that's still being written, one handcrafted masterpiece at a time. So, as the sun dips lower and the workday winds down, you reflect on the challenges and triumphs of your craft. The afternoon may have been a whirlwind of activity, but it's also a reminder of the incredible tapestry of life that makes Venice what it is. And as you pack up your tools and prepare to head home, Remember this. In a city where every stone and canal tells a story, your own tale of perseverance and creativity is just as vital. Stay tuned for more, because in Venice, the adventure never truly ends. As the sun finally surrenders to the Venetian horizon, you're ready to swap the clamour of the workshop for the intrigue of the evening. You've survived another day in the heart of La Serenissima, that not-so-serene city that never ceases to amaze. But wait, there's more. The night is young, and for a Venetian artisan, the evening is a tapestry of social and cultural experiences, each thread as vibrant as the last. First stop, a local feast. Now, don't get your hopes up for a banquet fit for a Doge. We're talking about a neighbourhood gathering, where the wine flows as freely as the gossip. Picture this, a piazza abuzz with chatter, the air perfumed with the aroma of roasting meat and spices. It's not the exclusive soirée of a patrician palace, but it's got all the charm of a community coming together. You'll find yourself mingling with fellow artisans, merchants, and anyone else lucky enough to snag an invite or clever enough to crash the party. It's like a medieval block party, but with more lute playing and fewer noise complaints. Here's the thing about Venetian feasts. They're as much about social currency as they are about sustenance. While the wealthy dine on stuffed peacock and imported delicacies, you're more likely to enjoy a hearty stew or a platter of grilled sardines. It's a culinary democracy of sorts, where the flavours are communal, even if the seating isn't. And let's not forget the wine, that great equalizer of social gatherings. Sure, it's not a Bordeaux, but it does the job, especially after a few cups. As you sip your wine and swap tales, you'll notice the music. Ah, the sweet serenade of the lute, the recorder's merry tune. Venice, my friend, is a city where music is as essential as water. But here's the kicker. While you might imagine everyone waltzing to Vivaldi, the reality is a bit more grounded. The high culture of grand operas and symphonies is largely the domain of the elite. For the masses, music is more about folk tunes and dance. Think of it as the Spotify playlist of the 14th century, a mix of local hits and timeless classics. Now, let's bust another myth, the accessibility of Venetian high culture. There's a romantic notion that Venice was a cultural utopia where art and music were shared freely among all. The truth? Not quite. The grand operas and lavish concerts were often exclusive affairs, ticketed events for the well-heeled. Sure, you might catch a glimpse of the action from the cheap seats or the canal if you're feeling particularly adventurous. But for the most part, high culture was a spectator sport for those with deep pockets. But don't let that dampen your spirits. The everyday artistry of Venice is where the real magic happens. From the street, performers who animate the piazzas, to the colourful masks and costumes that dazzle during carnival, there's no shortage of creativity on display. Even the gondoliers, with their melodic calls and witty banter, contribute to the city's vibrant cultural tapestry. As the night wears on, you might find yourself drawn to one of Venice's many churches for evening vespers. Despite the city's secular reputation, religion plays a central role in the lives of its citizens. The church is not just a place of worship, but a community hub, where faith and social life intersect. Walking into a Venetian church is like stepping into a sanctuary of art and architecture, with frescoes and stained glass that reflect the city's devotion and artistic prowess. Here's a fun fact. Venice has more than 150 churches, each one a testament to the city's complex relationship with faith and power. The basilicas and cathedrals are the crown jewels, but even the humblest chapel holds a piece of Venice's spiritual heart. And while the clergy might preach humility, the city's religious institutions are anything but modest. They're power players in their own right, wielding influence over everything from political decisions to charitable works. But let's not pretend it's all solemn prayer and piety. Venetian religious festivals are legendary, blending sacred and secular in a way that only this city can. Picture a procession of masked revellers, the clang of church bells mingling with the laughter of children. It's a celebration of life and faith, a reminder that in Venice, even devotion has a flair for the dramatic. As you reflect on the day, it's clear that being a Venetian artisan is about more than just craftsmanship. It's about navigating a city of contrasts, where the opulence of the elite meets the grit of everyday life. It's about finding beauty in the mundane, whether through the art that adorns the churches or the music that fills the streets. It's a microcosm of human ingenuity, where the highs and lows of history play out in the canals and cobblestones. And here's the thing about myths. They endure because they capture something true, even if the details are fuzzy. The romance of Venice is real, not because everyone lives like a duke, but because the city itself is a masterpiece, a living, breathing work of art. It's the artisans like you who add colour to this canvas, who carve their stories into its stones. So, as the stars twinkle over the Grand Canal and the city settles into its nighttime rhythm, consider this. Venice is a testament to the power of dreams and determination. It's a place where the past and present collide, where the hustle of daily life is softened by the glow of history. And as you make your way home, the echoes of music and laughter trailing in your wake, remember that you are part of this grand narrative, a thread in the rich tapestry of La Serenissima. In the end, the legacy of a Venetian artisan is one of resilience and creativity, a reminder that beauty is born from struggle, and that even the humblest craftsman contributes to the grandeur of history. So, rest well, dear artisan, for tomorrow brings another day in the city of dreams, a day filled with both the romance and reality of Venice.